Chapter 790. The woman who walked into the shop looked to be in her 30s. She had a beautiful appearance, but a head of extremely eye-catching white hair. This was also the reason why the girl was momentarily stunned. The white-haired woman's voice was soft as she asked, "I ordered a bolt of Suyun brocade here yesterday. Have they arrived yet? I've already sent someone to hurry them. They'll be here soon." The girl smiled apologetically and said, "Madam, why don't you take a seat in the inner room and have some tea and pastries? I'll inform you as soon as the goods arrive." The standard of this cloth shop was extremely high, even in the capital where there were many shops. Because of the high price of the cloth, they usually entertained some important guests. Thus, a room was specially opened in the back for the guests to rest and entertain themselves while waiting. When the servant girl behind the white-haired woman helped her into the inner room, she said with a smile, "If second master knows that Miss has prepared a gift for him, he will definitely be very happy." The white-haired woman shook her head and said, "It's just a pair of knee pads. After the beginning of autumn, the weather has gradually become cold. Second brother has an old injury on his leg. I only hope this can lessen his pain." As the two spoke, they slowly walked into the inner room. Hiss! Singzumo put down the thing in her hand and looked at the dark red spot on her fingertip. She frowned slightly and gently sucked on her finger. She was already used to this small sting, but she was not satisfied with the thing in her hand. They were both women, but Sister Roaching could make such exquisite little clothes. How come it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens when it came to her? A baby's little clothes had been sewn into a mess by her. Even if it wasn't for the present, she had to think about the future. Her own child had to wear a few pieces of clothes she had sewn herself. After thinking about this, her pretty face became a bit red. "Miss, are you making little clothes for the child?" A somewhat surprised voice came from behind. Zungzumo turned around and was startled when she saw the white-haired woman. Then, her face became even redder. She hurriedly put away the things in her hand and said in a panic, "No, I'm just sewing it for fun." The white-haired woman sat down next to her with a smile and said, "There's nothing to be embarrassed about. Everything is difficult at the beginning. When I first started, I wasn't as good as you, really." Sangzumo looked up at her in surprise. The white-haired woman nodded and looked at her, asking, "Miss, did you do it for your child?" I don't have a child yet." Zungzumo shook her head with a blush. The white-haired woman looked at her carefully. Her eyebrows were not open yet, so she should still be a virgin. It was indeed a little too early to prepare these things. However, wasn't she the same? 20 years ago, she had the exact same thought as her. Now, there were more than 10 sets of such clothes at home, but no one had ever worn them. Her gaze fell in the hands of the girl opposite her. Looking at the clothes that were so badly made, she seemed to be reminded of something. After staring blankly for a moment, she shook her head and pointed at a certain spot on the clothes. She smiled and said, "Look, this place shouldn't be sewn like this." Hearing her mention clothes, Zingzumo hurriedly looked up. The white-haired woman smiled and said, "And here, you can't use this kind of needlework here. I will teach you a needlework technique." It was taught by the best nanny in the mansion. Zungzumo had a very high level of painting, and she had designed so many clothing styles. Naturally, her imagination was very strong. The white-haired woman only needed to give her a little poke, and she could immediately figure out the mystery. She took apart the place that had been sewn and did it according to what the white-haired woman had taught her. It was indeed much better than before. "Thank you so much." At this moment, she finally found the right direction and felt a sense of accomplishment. She held the white-haired woman's hand and said excitedly. The white-haired woman smiled and asked, "Miss and your lover should be getting married soon, right?" Zungzumo was startled. She lowered her head and said with a blush, I don't know when." The white-haired woman patted her hand and said, "Needlework is not difficult. As long as you put your heart into it, you can quickly learn it. It's urgent. This matter couldn't be explained." Zungzumo just blushed and lowered her head in silence. At this time, the girl from before walked in and said, "Madam, the Sian brocade you wanted has arrived." The white-haired woman stood up and nodded. She thought for a moment and asked, "Do you have soft smoke and cicada gauze here?" Soft smoke and cicada gauze were the materials that had been the talk of the capital recently. Everyone talked about them as if they were gods. There were even a few stories about these two materials that no one knew if were true or false. Although they hadn't been sold yet, the price had already reached an outrageous level. The girl shook her head and said, "These two materials haven't been officially sold yet. You won't be able to buy them in any cloth store in the capital." The white-haired woman nodded and said, "Then forget it. Young miss, I heard that the soft smoke net is extremely thin. If you use it as a mosquito net, it will look like smoke from a distance. Is it true?" As she walked out of the shop, a young maid carrying a piece of cloth behind her muttered, "I only heard about it from the second madam. I wanted to buy it for her, but since it hasn't been sold yet, we'll talk about it later." The white-haired woman shook her head and said, "Let's go back." Wait a moment. Footsteps came from behind her. The white-haired woman turned around and saw the girl from before quickly walking out. Zheng Zumo looked at her and said with a smile, "If you want the soft smoke and cicada gauze, I just happen to have some extra. If you don't mind." The white-haired woman paused for a moment before nodding slightly. "Okay, miss, this soft smoke is so thin. It would look great if it was made into a mosquito net. That girl is so generous, giving us 4 bolts at once. I heard there are only 4 colors. Now we have all of them. This cicada gauze is also not bad, and it looks good. These two materials can't be bought in the entire capital. I wonder where Miss Zheng got them." On the street, 2 young servant girls carried several bolts of cloth in their arms and whispered to each other as they walked. Behind them, a man with a square face turned his head and said in a low voice, "Go and find out where that girl from earlier came from." The white-haired woman looked back at them and said, "No need. If we meet anyone on the street, we will also investigate their background. How many people does second brother need to arrange around me?" The man had a troubled expression and said, "Third miss, but the second master. If second brother asks, I will give him an explanation." The white-haired woman looked at him and said, "However, second brother is usually busy with work. Don't bother him with these small things." "Yes." The man could only nod helplessly. The white-haired woman turned around and revealed a slight smile. Looking at the girl, she felt like she was looking at herself from many years ago. This was why she taught her those things in the cloth shop. Later, the girl sent someone back to fetch the cloth, and the 2 of them sat in the shop for a while and chatted. Of course, most of the time, it was the girl who asked her about needlework. She also answered them one by one, including the girl's request to set up a time to continue asking her for advice. She also agreed without hesitation. She could understand the girl's thoughts. She made clothes for her own child. Even if her finger was pricked by needles and was riddled with scars, no matter how much she suffered, her heart would still be sweet. Just like her from 20 years ago. Chapter 791. Ever since he lost to Her Royal Highness the last time, Li Yi had never received a smile from Mississippi Liu. Of course, the behavior of taking the initiative to pick up food for him during meals had never appeared again. For this matter, Li Yi felt very wronged. That day, she clearly did not perform well, which was why she lost to Princess Royal by half a move. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. These days, Princess Royal's good friend came to visit, but she did not take the opportunity to find Princess Royal to regain her face. Instead, she vented her anger on him. To think that he thought she was reasonable last time. He had really misjudged her. Moreover, she only lost by half a move, but Princess Royal lost her entire life. It was clear at a glance which was more important and which was more important. Li Yi sighed. They were all family. She was unreasonable, but he could not argue with her. She clearly did not do anything wrong, but she still had to think about how to ease the situation. Fong walked in with a box in his hand and asked, "Young master, this broken thing is not worth much money. Why do you still want to make it?" The broken thing he was talking about was the glass that had gone from a value of 10,000 gold to worthless in a short period of time. It should be called glass now. Ever since Lioli lowered the price, the secret glass workshop had not been shut down. To old Fong, it was a complete waste of manpower and resources. He opened the box and took out something from inside. He weighed it in his hand and waved it in front of old Fong's eyes. He shook his head and said, "What's the use of this lousy thing other than being able to see people more clearly?" Sometimes old Fong was like a wise man, but sometimes he just couldn't wrap his head around it. This small mirror was something that he had spent a lot of effort to create with great difficulty. In terms of effect, of course, it could not be compared to the electroplated mirrors of the future, but it was only a little darker, and the clarity was not bad. At least, it was hundreds of times better than the bronze mirrors of this world. Glass could not only be sold as a luxury. Now that the mirror had been made, the next step, Li planned to get someone to grind it and see if they could make a set of binoculars. This thing was very useful in many places. For example, it could be used to observe the situation of the enemy and the army, to enjoy the scenery when traveling, or to steal, of course. None of this was important. The most important thing right now was how to use this mirror to mend the cracks in his relationship with Mississippi Lou, to bury the hatchet, to reconcile, to rekindle old dreams. A mirror was indispensable in a woman's room, especially for a woman who loved beauty. If a glass mirror was placed in this era, it would definitely be a treasure pursued by countless women. Li glanced at Fong and was too lazy to explain to him. Mississippi Lou had just finished practicing her sword and was now wiping her precious autumn water. Li walked over and stood in front of her. Mississippi Lou continued to wipe her sword without lifting her head. Li handed over the already embedded mirror and said, "Don't wipe it yet. I'll give you something. One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions." Mississippi Lou finally spoke, but she still did not raise her head. Li moved the mirror closer again to make it easier for her to see herself in the mirror. Second young mistress Lou finally stopped moving. She stared at the woman in the mirror, whose features were extremely clear. She was completely stunned. She was used to seeing a blurry bronze mirror. It was impossible for her not to be shocked when she suddenly saw her other self in the clear glass mirror. "What's wrong? Have you never seen such a beautiful woman before? One who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions." Li looked at her proudly. "This is the one and only Lioli glass mirror in the world. Just take it as me being solicitous. If you don't want it, I'll give it to someone else." In a flash, the mirror in his hand disappeared. He did not even have time to react. This made Li understand more about the gap between him and Mississippi Lou. "Thanks." She really liked the mirror in her hand. The bronze mirror in the room could be thrown away in a moment. Mississippi Lou raised her head and glanced at it. With this sentence, it meant that she had been bought over by him. This mirror was worth it. Fong looked at this scene from afar, with an extremely surprised expression on his face. He had seen the second miss arguing with the son-in-law because of jealousy these days. Just because of that broken thing, the second miss compromised first? Although there were many things he did not understand, he was not stupid. If the second miss liked it so much, it meant that it was not that broken. It was very likely to be a valuable treasure. He quickly walked over and looked at Li. He smiled and said, "Son-in-law, the workshop has made more than 10 pieces of this thing." He counted with his fingers and said, "You can give away 10 pieces at most. Can you leave 2 for me?" Li looked at him in a daze. He then looked back at Mississippi Lou and found that Mississippi Lou was also looking at him at the same time. Mississippi Lou crossed her arms, her eyes shining. "One of a kind?" Li's face darkened. He grabbed Fong's arm and walked out. Go, go, go. Why are you keeping it? You need to change this habit of yours. If Mrs. Fong finds out, I'll see how you deal with it." He couldn't favor one and discriminate against the other. If he gave Miss Lu a mirror, it meant that he had to give many more. The one in Rui's room was naturally the brightest and largest. Xiao Huan, Shanning, and Yongning's room were all in cartoon shapes. Princess Royal got 1, Willow Lane got 2, Fong got 2, and his family got at least 2 more. The last one was taken by Li Xian. He needed more time to make it again. What do you think is the principle of this glass mirror? Why can it reflect people's figures so clearly? Why is the handwriting in the mirror reversed? Li was fishing in the lake of the School of Mathematics. Since he found that the fish here were fat and easy to catch, he did not plan to buy from the market. It was best to catch fish by himself. However, since Li Xian came over and started talking to himself, he had not caught a single fish. He had caught two just now. It was enough for today. He put away his rod and looked at the Princess Royal in the pavilion behind him. He asked, "Last time, the School of Mathematics lacked books and paper. Have you solved the problem?" Although it was not class time, the three deans were here. Even the students of the School of Mathematics avoided them. Before the eldest princess could say anything, Li Xian said, "Of course not. How else can we solve this? Normal books are easy to deal with. Although most of the engravings are controlled by the powerful families, the ones we can find should be enough. However, the books you specified don't have engravings. How to print them is a big problem. If we were to engrave them one by one, it would cost a lot. I'm afraid that most of the money we have would have to be invested in this area," he said angrily, "and paper. Once the schools of mathematics start to operate, there will be a huge demand for paper. Although the higher the demand, the lower the price. However, almost 90% of the paper shops are in the hands of the rich families." In order to discuss this, Mingzu visited the Yu family 3 times. She didn't even get to see the head of the Yu family. "You still have the cheek to say that?" Li Yi threw down the fishing rod and looked at him. He asked, "If there is no engraving, why don't you think of a way? Paper is expensive, and the rich families don't cooperate. Why don't you reduce the cost and make your own? If you have to rely on Mingzu to think of a way, what use is the Academy of Sciences? What use are you?" Chapter 792. Solve the problem of engraving. Li Xian looked as if he had heard a fairy tale and stared straight at Li Yi. "It's easy for you to say. Do you think it's like the existing collections of history? There are countless engravings, and the teaching materials you mentioned have not been compiled yet. Where can I find so many craftsmen to engrave them one by one? Even if I can really engrave them, I don't know how long it will take. As for improving the paper making and lowering the cost, if it could be lowered, it would have been done long ago. There are many kinds of paper on the market, but only a few are suitable for writing. The aristocratic families like the Yu family, which have been around for hundreds of years, all have their own unique paper-making formula, which is the most widely circulated in the market. If they don't cooperate, this matter can't be improved." Li Xian's spittle flew as he spoke, and his tone was rather indignant. "No one has solved these 2 problems for thousands of years. How can we solve them so easily?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Oh, do you want to bet?" Li Xian looked at him and asked, "What do you want to bet on?" "Let's bet on whether I can make cheap and high-quality paper, and whether I can think of a way to print books in large quantities in a short period of time." These 2 things are related to all the scholars in the world. Don't try to trick me. If you have such a method, you would have taken it out when you were building the academy. Why would you wait until now?" Li Xian sneered and asked, "Tell me, what are the stakes?" "I haven't thought of the stakes yet. We'll talk about it later, but I'm sure it won't be too much." "Why are you afraid?" "Afraid?" Li Xian sneered. "Why don't you go out and ask around? I'm a crown prince. What have I been afraid of? Then do you want to bet or not?" "No." Although he was not afraid, if he still insisted on betting with him knowing that he would lose, then it wasn't a question of whether he was afraid or not, but whether he was stupid or not. Based on past experience, whenever he made a bet with her, he must be very confident about something. Today, his tone was so certain that it couldn't be any more successful. Only a fool would make such a bet. Li Xian had a fierce expression on his face as he said, "You have to teach the Yu family a lesson and help Mingzu vent her anger." He picked up the 2 fish and walked back. As he walked, he muttered to himself, "How should I eat the fish today? Thank you so much for the past 2 days." In the small pavilion of the cloth shop, Zheng Zumo stood up and bowed to the white-haired woman. The white-haired woman smiled and said, "It's okay. I have nothing to do anyway. I haven't touched these things for many years, so I'm a bit rusty. I probably won't have the chance to do it in the future. I'm afraid I'll forget about it if time passes." Zheng Zumo shook her head and said, "How can there be no chance to do it? I don't know if your child is married yet. In the future, your child will also have children. They will be very happy wearing the clothes you made." "My child." The white-haired woman's eyes were a bit dazed. Then, She smiled and said, "That's true. While I can still do it, I should make more. After a few years, I won't be able to do it." She turned to look at the girl with a smile and said, "I like the fabrics in this shop very much. If there are any new styles in the future, please keep an eye out for me." Zhang Zumo nodded with a smile. "Recently, all the famous fabrics in the capital are available here. As long as you have heard of them, just send someone to get them." Due to some marketing reasons, many of the best fabrics needed to be preheated in advance. After a period of discussion in the capital, they would be pushed out. Before this, it was almost impossible for others to get the fabrics. However, these cloth shops and the clothing shops in the capital were all under her control. Naturally, there was no problem of not getting the goods. Chen Miaoyu suddenly looked at Zhang Zumo and asked, "Miss Zhang is about to get married, right?" Zhang Zumo heard this and blushed a little. She whispered, "No, not at all." Chen Miaoyu looked at her with a smile on her face. She held her hand and said, "Although we are women, since we have met someone we like, we still have to fight for him. How can a moment of reserve compare to a lifetime of happiness?" Hearing this, her face became even redder. She had seen, kissed, hugged, and even said such shameful words. How could she still have any reserve? In short, don't regret what you do now. Chen Miaoyu patted her hand and said, "I should go too. I will see you off." Although they hadn't met many times, the two of them were very congenial. When they walked out of the inner room hand in hand, they heard a slightly messy sound coming from a shop. Inside the shop, a young girl said apologetically, "My apologies, sir, the soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn haven't arrived yet. Please wait for a few days. As soon as they arrive, we will immediately send someone to inform you." Inside the shop, the young man hugged an enchanting woman and whispered with his head lowered, "You see, they don't have the goods here. There's nothing we can do." The enchanting woman said coquettishly, "It's not that they don't have the goods. These two kinds of fabrics are only produced in their shop. Young Master Yu doesn't know, but she can tell you that they don't have them here. Those slutty foxes in the Jade Courtyard all use them." The young man showed a hesitant expression. He didn't know the details of this cloth shop, but he knew that it was impossible to do business in the capital without some kind of background. The Yu family was also a big aristocratic family in the Jing Kingdom. Although it was not as big as the Chui family and the Wang family, it was not far behind. Because of the relationship between the king of Shu, the Yu family and the Chui family were especially close. Unlike the Chui family, which mainly dealt in jewelry, the Yu family had been running a paper mill for decades. The Yu family's paper name was known throughout the Jing Kingdom. In the eyes of most people, they were a top scholarly family. However, this was not the capital he was proud of. At least for now, the Yu family did not have the capital to let him run amok at the bottom of a well. Just as young Master Yu was hesitating, the enchanting woman beside him leaned over and whispered something in his ear. "I heard that the soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn are extremely thin, and the color is also beautiful. If I wear them, I will definitely look good with half of them covered. When the time comes, I will wear them for you to see." Although young Master Yu didn't know what soft smoke gauze and cicada yarn were, he understood the woman's words. Suddenly, a blurry image appeared in his mind. Although the Yu family was not strong enough to run amok in the capital, that was in the past. Now, even the eldest princess who presided over the court had a favor to ask of the Yu family, but she did not get to see her father. Recently, the Chui family was extremely satisfied with the Yu family. In the future, when the king of Shu ascended to the throne, the Yu family might be able to climb even higher. Even if there was someone behind the shop, they would not dare to provoke the Yu family now. Once again, thinking of the eye-catching image that appeared in his mind, young Master Yu reached into his robe and adjusted his posture. Then, he looked at the woman and said angrily, "How dare you lie to me? You didn't receive the goods? Then tell me, where did the cloth on the outside come from?" Chapter 793. In the shop, the young girl had an awkward expression. Young master, you shut up." Young Master Yu impatiently waved his hand and interrupted her. "Where's your shop manager? Let him personally tell me if you have any goods or not." As soon as he finished speaking, several men who looked like guards immediately walked up and stood behind him. They were full of vigor. A slightly older woman turned around to look at the door of the inner room. Seeing the woman at the door nod slightly, she immediately walked up and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. We don't have soft smoked silk and cicada wing yarn at the moment. I don't know where young master's residence is. Once we have the goods tomorrow, we will immediately send someone to deliver them to your residence." Seeing the attitude of the shop manager immediately soften, young Master Yu's heart calmed down a bit. It seemed that the power behind this shop wasn't that great. However, since the other party had expressed goodwill, he didn't need to be overbearing and make an enemy for no reason. Ning Yuan Ho's residence, he lightly said. He lowered his head to look at the enchanting woman and whispered, "You see, they said that they will deliver it tomorrow. Why don't we wait a bit longer? I will listen to young master." The woman nodded. She then glanced around the shop and her eyes suddenly lit up. She pointed at a young maidservant in front of her who was holding a roll of cloth and said, "That Kunyu courtyard has a relationship with them, so they can always get the latest styles earlier. I won't ask for anything else, but young master, I also want a roll of cloth like that." Young Master Yu tilted his head and glanced at this woman. He had spent a lot of effort to win over this woman. She was a famous prostitute in the capital. It was said that she hadn't been combed. Although he only wanted to play with her, he still wanted to spend a night with her so that he wouldn't waste the effort of the past few days. He only wanted to quickly get tonight. Before that, he would naturally do his best to satisfy the other party's request. It was only a roll of cloth. He pointed at the maidservant and said to the cloth store manager, "Did you hear that? Bring 2 rolls of cloth like the one in her hands for this young master." The steward looked back with a troubled expression and said, "Young master, I'm really sorry. This type of woven cloud brocade will only be available for sale in 3 months. The soft smoke gauze and cicada wing muslin were going on sale today, so it was fine to give it to him 2 days in advance. However, this woven cloud brocade was a new material that wasn't going to be put on the market in the near future." She didn't have the right to decide. This time, there was no need for the enchanting woman to pout coquettishly. Young Master Yu's expression had already darkened. Just now, he had clearly told the other party that his home was Ning Yuanho Mansion. But now, the other party was pointing at the cloth in the servant girl's hand and said that it would only be sold in 3 months. Was he teasing him? The weight of the 3 words, Marquiningyan, was not so light. Moreover, the Yu residence of today was no longer the Yu residence of yesterday. It was about to soar to new heights. As the 3rd young master of the Yu family, how could he be humiliated again and again? He took 2 steps forward and suddenly smiled. "What did you say? Say it again." At this time, another woman walked out from behind and said faintly, "I'm very sorry, this shop cloth is still in the testing stage. This bolt is only a sample. If this young master is really interested, please come back in 3 months." When he saw the woman in front of him, a strange expression appeared on young Master Yu's face. He then pointed at the young servant girl holding the cloth and said, "Oh, a sample. Since it's a sample, then give this young master 8 or 10 bolts. Otherwise, this young master would like to ask, why can your cloth be given to the prostitutes in a brothel, but not this young master?" Thinking of the woman's words, young Master Yu's gaze swept across the room. When he saw the white-haired woman, he curled his lips and said, "The brothels these days really have all kinds of tricks. There are even white-haired girls. I don't know how those people could bear to do it." He didn't conceal his voice when he said this. Zheng Zumo was startled when she heard this. Then anger appeared in her beautiful eyes. However, before she could speak, a clear voice reached her ears. "Shut up." Inside the shop, a middle-aged man's expression had been calm until young Master Yu said this. His face instantly turned ashen. He took 2 steps forward and slapped him hard in the face. Young Master Yu seemed to be stunned by this sudden slap. He staggered and almost fell to the ground. After stabilizing himself for a long time, he felt the burning pain on his face. Only then did he understand what had just happened. "What are you still standing there for?" He kicked the guard next to him and said angrily, "Break his hand for me. 3rd young miss, go in and rest for a while." Leave this to us. The middle-aged man turned around and said softly. He cracked the joints of his hands, and when he turned back, his expression became fierce. He looked at the dozen or so figures coming in from outside and ordered, "Be careful not to break anything in the shop." At this time, seeing the crowd surrounding them, young Master Yu, who realized what had happened, began to pale. "You, what do you want?" "My father is Ning Yuan Ho, and I'm a member of the Yu family. You, if you dare to make a move..." Zheng Zumo was pulled by the white-haired woman into the inner room in a daze. Only a moment later, the middle-aged man came in and said respectfully, "It's all taken care of. Third young miss, let's go." Chun Miaoyu turned her head and smiled at Zheng Zumo. "I'll go first." Zheng Zumo nodded absent-mindedly. Only now did she understand that the identity of this Madame Chun, who was skilled in needlework, did not seem to be as simple as she had imagined. At this moment, young Master Yu was no longer in the shop. He and his guards had been grabbed by the arms and thrown out of the shop. Only the enchanting woman was left. Her face was pale, and when she came to her senses, she screamed and ran out in a panic. In a brothel somewhere in the capital, several women looked at the enchanting woman who walked in and said with a smile, "Oh, why are you back so early today? Why didn't that young Master Yu pester you a little longer? Sigh, why am I not as lucky as my sister? The Yu family is truly noble. If I can be taken back by young Master Yu as a concubine, I won't have to worry about wealth for the rest of my life." The enchanting woman laughed and teased them for a while. Then she went upstairs by herself. She walked into her room and closed the door. "How is it?" The enchanting woman turned around with a solemn expression. Looking at the other side of the curtain, she said, "It's very different from the plan. There wasn't much conflict with the other party." She quietly recounted what happened today. After a long time, a voice came from the other side. "It's fine, these are enough. The one who suffered today was young Master Yu. As long as the Yu family doesn't pursue the matter, isn't my lord's plan, the Yu family..." The voice of the man behind the curtain was still very calm. "Whether to pursue the matter or not is not up to the Yu family. Chen Sheng only has one sister. For her, he would turn against his own family. That person will not let the Yu family off easily. However, one Yu family is not enough, my lord. Leave the capital before tomorrow and never come back." Chapter 794. The capital magistrate, Lu Daiyou, had been very busy recently. Every day, he worked day and night. He was often busy until late at night. He could fall asleep with his head on the pillow, causing his wife and concubines to complain a lot about him. He could only pretend that he did not see their resentful gazes. Several academies in the capital were still in the midst of preparations. After the corresponding preparations were completed, they would have to face the problem of recruiting students. Her Highness had handed this matter over to him, so he naturally had to do his best. Now that His Majesty had retired and Princess Royal was temporarily in charge of the court, Lu Daiyou had more opportunities than most of the officials in the court. After all, as the former magistrate of Anxi County and what he had done after coming to the capital city, he had long been labeled as Princess Royal. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get such a great credit for the preparation of the academy. Fortunately, since Princess Royal took over the government, the situation in the court had changed. Many people didn't know the situation for a while, so the capital city was much more peaceful. There were no more chores to bother him, so he could concentrate on the preparation of the academy. "Your Excellency." Arrestor Zhao knocked on the door and walked in. He stood in the hall and cupped his hands respectfully to Wei Xiaobao. "What's the matter?" County Magistrate Lu glanced at him and asked, "Is there another difficult case?" "It's not difficult." Detective Zhao shook his head and said, "Today I saw people from Marquis Chen's mansion fighting with people from Marquis Ning Yuan's mansion on the street." Marquis Chen's mansion and Marquis Ning Yuan's mansion? County Magistrate Lu put down his pen and frowned. These two families have always been close, and they are both king of Shu's people. What kind of fight did they have? Did they report it to the Yamen? Not really. Detective Zhao shook his head and said, "People from Marquis Ning Yuan's mansion seem to have suffered a loss and then went their separate ways. County Magistrate Liu glared at him and said, "Why did you come to me if you didn't report it to the Yamen? Don't you think I have enough things to do here? I have spoken out of turn." Detective Zhao hurriedly bowed and turned to leave the hall. He whispered, "Young Master Yu could have provoked anyone, but he provoked third Miss Chunu." Hearing that name, County Magistrate Liu trembled and asked, "Who are you talking about?" After a while, after listening to Detective Zhao's story, County Magistrate Liu breathed a sigh of relief and murmured, "It's good that you didn't intervene in it. Just pretend that you didn't see it. Don't get involved in it." He knew better than anyone else how Royal Prince Duanyang's 2 ribs were broken. Furthermore, although he hadn't been in the capital for long, he had long heard the rumors about the minister in charge. That was a lunatic who wouldn't even recognize his own family as long as his reverse scale was touched. The Yu family were in big trouble. High Dukshan public house. Yu family. Chen Chong took a sip of tea and said, "The eldest princess has visited 3 times, but Yu Dingfeng refused to see her, claiming to be sick. He has also announced that he won't sell a single piece of paper to the academy. The official workshops belong to the imperial court and can't all serve the academy. If this problem can't be solved, I'm afraid that the eldest princess's academy can only be built in the sky." Opposite him, Chun Qing nodded. The imperial consort is very satisfied with the Yu family this time. In addition, the Yu family has always been His Highness the King of Shu's wallet. This time, the Chui family has suffered heavy losses, so the Yu family's importance is even more prominent. In the future, the Yu family will have a high status in the imperial court. Perhaps at that time, even our Chun family will have to rely on them. Although they didn't want others to climb over their heads, the Yu family's importance now surpassed that of the Chen family. If they really succeeded in the future, the Yu family's contributions would not go unnoticed. The 2 brothers continued to comment on the current imperial court situation when a servant came in to report. Chen Qing looked down and asked lightly, "What's the matter?" The servant immediately said, "Just now outside, a few guards of the Chen family had a conflict with 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence." 3rd Young Master Yu of Ningyuan Marquis' residence? Hearing this, Chen Qing frowned and asked, "Was it Li Yin or Li Xing? What happened? Was anyone injured?" "It's not the 2 young masters. No one in our residence was injured, but 3rd Young Master Yu suffers small loss. It's good that no one was injured." Chen Chong waved his hand and said, "Young people are hot-blooded and can be forgiven. This is nothing. Send someone to prepare a generous gift and send it to the Yu residence. Then, this matter will be considered settled. If it was anyone else, there would naturally be no need for generous gifts. However, the Yu family was different. The Yu family had a bright future ahead of them, so the Chen family still had to show some sincerity." He looked at the servant and asked, "If it wasn't Li Yin or Li Xing, could it be Li Shun? We had just confined him a few days ago and just released him today, and he's already causing trouble again?" The servant knelt on the ground and said in a low voice, "It wasn't young Master Li Shen either. It was 3rd Young Master Yu's guard. That 3rd Young Master Yu didn't know 3rd Young Master Yu's identity and said some vulgar words. Meow you?" Chun Chong suddenly stood up from his chair and asked, "What did the one surnamed you say? Speak." He said that 3rd Young Master is a prostitute. Crack. The teacup shattered and the tea splashed everywhere. "Bastard. He's Yu Dingfeng's good son." An extremely gloomy voice sounded in the hall. Not long after, a wave of disorderly footsteps resounded within the Chen estate. The Chun clan's 2nd master's face was livid, and a few dozen guards followed behind him as they hurriedly left the Chen estate. They headed west in a threatening manner, and all the people on the way moved aside in terror as they gazed toward a certain direction with lingering fear in their hearts, wondering exactly what had happened. Ningyuan Marquis' residence. Tears welled up in the eyes of the gorgeously dressed woman. She held 3rd Young Master Yu's hand and sobbed. Who did this to him? My poor Yu or Chun family? How did you get into a conflict with the Chun family? How many times have I told you? The situation in the capital is unclear, so try not to cause trouble for me. Do you all have ears? A middle-aged man stood next to her and glanced at the bruised and swollen face of third young Master Yu with a pained expression. He turned his head and asked the guards with a cold expression. One of the guards replied fearfully, "Third young master didn't do anything and they attacked first." This time, it really wasn't young master's fault. As he spoke, he recounted the entire incident. Of course, he omitted the part where the young man had insulted the woman from the Chun family, offending the Chen family just for a prostitute. Ning Yuan Ho, Yu Dingfeng's face darkened as he said, "When will you grow a little more careful? The Chen family has gone too far. You didn't do anything and they beat him to this state." The woman's eyes welled up with tears as she gritted her teeth and said, "Master, you must get justice for you." The middle-aged man looked at third young Master Yu and asked with a frown, "You already told them where you came from. Why would the Chun family attack you for no reason?" Third young Master Yu's face was full of resentment as he said, "How would I know? The Chun family are all crazy. That second young master of the Chun family is crazy, and so is that white-haired woman. I only said one thing to her." "What did you say?" Ning Yuan Ho's expression changed, and his heart skipped a beat. "What white-haired woman?" Third young Master Yu acted as if he didn't see the panic on his father's face and said, "I don't know. I only heard that person say something about third young Miss Chun, third young Miss Chun." "Oh no." Ning Yuan Ho's face was pale. He had just muttered a few words when someone ran in from outside in a panic. A servant of the Yu family panted heavily as he ran over and said with a terrified expression, Master, something bad has happened." The Chun family. The Chun family is here." Ning Yuan Ho's expression changed drastically, and he waved his hand without hesitation. Quickly hide the young master." The second young master of the Chen family had brought a group of people with him and aggressively attacked Ning Yuan Ho's estate. Even in the capital, which never lacked for entertainment, it was still a big event. After hearing the news, the entire capital was in an uproar in an extremely short period of time. Countless people were paying attention to the development of this matter. Some people were watching from the estate while others hurriedly left and rushed in the direction of Ning Yuan Ho's estate. Inside the yamen, County Magistrate Liu reminded Constable Chen again, "Remember, we didn't see anything just now, and you don't know anything." At the Ministry of Revenue Yamen, Assistant Minister Zeng hurriedly took his leave and immediately left in a sedan chair. At the Chui family estate, a carriage drove out from the side door and quickly headed in a certain direction. Qin estate. Qin Yin, who had just heard the news, quickly walked out of the estate. Just as he was about to step onto the carriage, a voice came from behind him. "Big brother, where are you going?" Qin Yin already had one foot on the carriage. He turned his head to look and frowned. "Where did you go again? You didn't even eat lunch at home." Lord Father just asked. Qin Fifth Master smiled and said, "There was a new show at the brothel today. I was so engrossed in it that I forgot the time. If you like to listen to shows just by a few actors at home, it's best not to go to that kind of place." Qin Yin said this and then boarded the carriage. He let down the curtain and urged, "Quick, to Ning Yuan Ho's estate." Qin Fifth Master shook his head. When he stepped into the Qin estate with his hands behind his back, he muttered in a low voice, "How can the shows at home be better than those outside?" Chapter 795. The second master of the Chun family, Chun Chong, had led dozens of guard from the House of High Dukes. They passed through the streets and alleys, aggressively attacking Ning Yuan Ho's residence. This incident had caused quite a stir in the capital for the past 2 days. The Ho's residence had been attacked. On a large scale, this was a crime punishable by death. But on a smaller scale, it could be so small that the authorities did not even need to show up. The attackers were from the House of High Dukes, led by Chen Chong. When the incident happened, the capital was in an uproar. However, this incident did not cause any serious consequences. Although the main gate of Ning Yuan Ho's residence had been torn down, the Yu family did not say anything. The authorities would not come looking for trouble. The commotion yesterday was not small. Not only the Chun and Yu families, but the Zeng, Chui, and Qin families, as well as many officials from the King of Shu's faction, all went to Yu's residence. Although it was not known how the incident was resolved, it was not a big deal. He knew about this yesterday, but he was only a little surprised. Internal strife was the custom of the king of Shu's faction, so he was not surprised. At this moment, he was listening to Xiao Chui complain that someone had caused trouble at the cloth shop yesterday. Although they were chased out, they said some nasty things that even she could not bear to listen to. That madam was very kind and taught the young miss many things. Now, the clothes that the young miss sewed were not as ugly as they used to be. Who was causing trouble yesterday? Li looked at her and asked. Xiao Chui thought for a moment and said, "It was something like young master Yu. I think it was Ning Yuan Ho or something. I can't remember." Li was startled. Ning Yuan Ho. Why did these 3 words sound so familiar? It seemed that the Yu family head that the eldest princess could not meet was Ning Yuan Ho. This morning, the internal strife incident was still spreading in the capital, and Ning Yuan Ho was also the male lead. The Yu family, what a coincidence. If the Yu family bullied others like this, the heavens would naturally accept it. He shook his head and then asked Xiao, "Earlier, you said that the madam who has been very close to your young miss recently. What's going on?" "This." Xiao Chui blinked and said, "I met her at the cloth shop last time. That madam is very good at needlework. She taught young miss how to make children's clothes. Do you know which family's madam is it?" Although the 2 women were surrounded by people to protect them, he did not want to give them the feeling that they were being monitored all the time. In addition to ensuring their safety, he would not interfere with other things. Even so, the sudden appearance of a madam by her side still had to be investigated. "I don't know. We only know that her surname is Chun. That madam has never mentioned it, so we can't ask her directly. However, she usually brings a lot of guards with her when she goes out." Xiao Chui blinked her eyes twice. Then she patted her head and said, "That's right, that madam's age isn't that old, but her hair is all white. That servant girl called her third lady, third miss, surnamed Chun, and her hair is all white?" Li was stunned. It can't be such a coincidence, right? On the street, Zheng Zumo and the white-haired woman walked side by side. The latter turned her head to look at her and asked, "The Yu family didn't make things difficult for you afterward, did they?" Zheng Zumo shook her head. "No, this is the capital. They wouldn't dare to do anything. The Yu family is powerful after all. It's better to be careful." She reminded, "If the Yu family makes things difficult for you in the future, come find me at Duke Chen's residence." Although the 2 had seen each other several times these days, due to their own reasons, they usually refer to each other as Madame Chun and Miss. They had never voluntarily revealed their identities. Zheng Zumo had already guessed that her identity was not ordinary from yesterday's incident, but she still did not expect it to be to this extent. Even the current Zheng family could not compare to a behemoth like the Chun family. Soon, she threw these thoughts to the back of her mind and nodded politely. She glanced around and suddenly realized that they were almost at Willow Lane. She pointed forward and said, "My house is just ahead. Madam, do you want to come in and sit for a bit?" Hearing this, the white-haired woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded lightly. "Miss, are you not from the capital?" As the 2 walked forward, the white-haired woman suddenly asked. This area belonged to the downtown area. There were no big mansions, and officials and rich families would not choose to build their houses here. This Miss Zheng had an extraordinary temperament, and she had such a shop in the capital. She had thought that she was also the daughter of such a family, but now it seemed that this was not the case. "I stayed in the capital for a few years when I was a child. Later, I went to another place and came back last year." Zheng Zumo briefly mentioned this matter. She did not want to mention some memories about the capital, including her own name. After all, more than 10 years ago, the Zheng family was also prominent. However, in that Zheng family, all the men of the direct line died, and the women became the musical house. Everything here, for her, was an extremely horrible memory. The white-haired woman did not ask further. The 2 walked to the entrance of an alley. Zheng Zumo smiled and pointed inside, saying, "It's in there." Above the entrance of the alley, there was a stone plaque on which the words Willow Alley were written. The white-haired woman just glanced at it and walked in side by side with Zheng Zumo. After a few steps, she suddenly stopped and murmured, "Willow Alley?" As if thinking of something, she looked back at Zhang Zumo with an expression of disbelief and expectation. "Miss Zhang, is it Miss Zhang Zumo from Willow Alley?" Hearing her name from the mouth of a person she had never revealed made her completely ignore the fact that the Willow Alley in front of her was not the eldest daughter of the Zhang family. Her body trembled, and her face turned pale. However, after Mrs. Chun said this, the expression on her face was different from any of what she had imagined. Surprise, and even a little bit of love. Seeing her reaction, Chun Miaoyu knew that her guess was right. Holding her hand, a smile appeared on her face, and she said, "It turns out to be you. I should have asked earlier. Zhang Zumo was confused by her reaction and asked in confusion, "Mrs. Chun, you know me?" Chun Miaoyu held her hand and said with a smile, "Let's go in and talk." Zhang Zumo was pulled by her and walked into the alley in a daze. "Okay, I'll go first. When your young miss or Miss Ruoqing comes back, just let them know." In the small courtyard, Li Yi stood up and patted Xiao Chui's head, saying, "Next time I come, I'll bring 2 glass mirrors for you and Xiaozhu." "Really?" Xiao Chui's eyes were shining. She had envied the mirror in her young miss room that could clearly reflect a person's figure for a long time. "Yes, you must keep your promise." Li Yi walked to the door of the courtyard, then turned back and waved. "Let's go." He raised his hand to open the door, but the door was pushed open from the outside. "I didn't expect you to know before." Zhang Zumo turned her head and walked in while talking to Mrs. Chun. When she stepped over the threshold, her chest was suddenly pressed by something. She looked back, saw Li Yi standing at the door, and lowered her head again. Looking at Miss Zhang and Miss Chun standing at the door, Li Yi's mouth slightly opened. He could swear on his conscience that just now, he really just wanted to open the door. "You're back. What a coincidence." His expression didn't change. He helped her tidy up her clothes and said with a smile, Chapter 796. How old are you? Your clothes are wrinkled and you don't even know how to tidy them up. If it wasn't for Xiao Chui, you wouldn't even be able to take care of yourself. Li Yi helped her tidy up her clothes and looked at her with a frown. Then, he turned to the white-haired woman and smiled. "You're here too. Come on in." Zhang Zumo looked at him and then at Mrs. Chun next to her. Confusion appeared on her face again. After walking back and sitting down in the guest hall, Li looked at Miss Chun and said, "I heard about what happened in the cloth shop yesterday. Thank you very much." Zhang Zumo whispered, "It's me who should be thanking someone. What does it have to do with you? It's the same. Third Miss Chun looked at Li Yi in her face and said with a smile, "Ah." Zhang Zumo was confused. She found that ever since Mrs. Chun knew her name, her attitude toward her had changed significantly. She was a little confused. At this moment, she still had a lot of questions in her mind, but she could only suppress these thoughts for now. Miss Chun looked at Zhang Zumo with a loving expression. Then, she turned to look at Li Yi and asked, "Rui should be giving birth soon. How is her health recently?" Li nodded and said, "There's still 3 months left. She is a martial artist and has always been in good health." Zhang Zumo was surprised. She knew Li Yi very well. He was very casual when talking to anyone. Even with elders, he was not afraid to make some harmless jokes. This was the first time she had seen him so well behaved. He even used honorifics to address others. This attitude was unprecedented, so she couldn't help but be more confused. "Zumo, there isn't much to do at the brothel. Let's eat dumplings today." Wan Ruoqing walked in from outside. Seeing the situation in the hall, she was slightly startled and asked, "There are guests." "This is Mrs. Chun." Zhang Zumo stood up and introduced her. Then she asked, "If you don't have anything else to do, why don't you eat here before leaving?" Miss Chun was startled for a moment. Then a smile appeared on her face, and she said, "Okay." She stood up and walked over. She naturally held Ruoqing's hand and asked with a smile, "You must be Miss Ruoqing. You are indeed a rare beauty." Wan Ruoqing felt a little guilty under her gaze. She didn't know why this Mrs. Chun, whom she met for the first time, was so enthusiastic. She secretly glanced at Zheng Zumo with a slightly confused expression. Zheng Zumo was also confused. She had never mentioned Sister Ruoqing to her. Why did she call out her name at first sight? At this moment, she was even more confused. She just wanted to ask Li Yi about it after Mrs. Chun left. Third Miss Chun seemed to realize that she had lost her composure. She let go of her hand and said, "Sorry for disturbing you today." "Not at all. Not at all," Wan Ruoqing said hurriedly. Then she said, "I didn't expect to have guests today. I will go out and buy more stuffing." "Miss Ruoqing, you don't have to do that." Third Miss Chun looked back and said, "Show her, go out and buy some more." The servant girl called Xiao had a troubled expression. She walked to her side and whispered, "But miss, today is your birthday. Second master is at home. Go." "Yes, miss." The servant girl bit her lip and finally nodded. She walked out. Wan Ruoqing turned around and ordered, "Yuzhu, Xiaocui, go bring the stuffing and the dough I rolled this morning to the courtyard. We will go over there to make dumplings." "Hee hee, time to make dumplings, just watch. Can the dumplings you make be eaten? It's as if the dumplings you make are edible. We still have to rely on Sister Ruoqing." The two servant girls chattered and ran away quickly. Wan Ruoqing and Third Miss Chun chatted and laughed as they walked out. Zheng Zumo and Li Yi were a few steps behind. Zheng Zumo tilted her head and asked, "Have you and Madame Chun known each other for a long time?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "It's a long story. I will tell you later." Zheng Zumo nodded and glared at Li Yi. She asked, "Didn't you say that you are a martial arts master and that nothing within a radius of 300 feet can escape your ears?" Bragging was just bragging. He was only slightly better than ordinary people. Within a radius of 300 feet, he could hear other people's voices more clearly than ordinary people, but it wasn't that exaggerated. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been caught by the old emperor hiding behind the bushes. 300 feet is a bit exaggerated. Actually, my skills are slightly weaker than 300 feet. How much is that? 3 feet. Is the distance of a door 3 inches? He looked at her with some embarrassment and anger. "You are a girl. Why do you have so many questions?" The voice paused and then said, "There are no creases on my clothes just now. Here, here, and here. Lanterns are hung off. Have you invited everyone that should be invited? Check again. Who said they can't come? Ask again. If they are sick, then tell them to scram. Drunken Moon Brothel has many guests today. The food and wine will take some time to prepare. What kind of guests are they? Chase them out. If there is a problem with one dish today, they won't be able to open again. What? 20 tables is too many? Just let them do as they say. Can't they just eat one table and throw one table away? All of you, be more attentive. If you mess up tonight's matters, then all of you can scram." In the house of High Duke, Chun Chong, the Minister of Ceremonies, did not look like an important official of the court. He walked quickly in the house and shouted without a care for his image. The servants in the house all held their breaths and were very careful. Today was the third lady's birthday, and the second elder had been preparing for it since half a month ago. Not only had he invited many distinguished guests, but the High Duke's public house had also been decorated with lanterns and streamers. At night, the capital city's most famous performers would perform on stage, and there would be no shortage of folk arts and acrobatics. According to the tradition of previous years, the capital city's most magnificent fireworks display would appear tonight. This tradition had been going on for more than 20 years without missing a single year. This was practically the most important event of the year in the House of High Duke. It was even more important than the birthday of the master and the second master. In the Chun family, mistakes in other areas could be forgiven, but today, even a small mistake would be met with heavy punishment. After inspecting the house of Chun for the third time, Chun Chong raised his head and drank a pot of cold tea before asking, "Where is the third lady? Is she not back yet?" A servant of the house of Chun immediately walked up and said, "The third lady went out early in the morning and has not returned yet." Chun Chong waved his hand. "Send someone to look for her. Don't let anything go wrong today." As soon as he finished speaking, a House of Chun guard hurried over from afar and whispered a few words in Chin Chong's ear. Chin Chong's face immediately darkened. He asked in a cold voice. What did you say? The third lady went to Willow Lane. And that Li was there as well? The guard nodded. Yes, when I found out, I immediately came back to report. The few of you, follow me out. Chen Chong ordered coldly and strode out of the house. A group of more than 10 people walked out of the house of Chun, causing some people on the street to stare in shock again. Most people did not know what had happened when the people in charge of the house of Ningyuan yesterday attacked the house of Hai Duke, but those who were in the know knew very well that even with the Chui and Qin families' persuasion, the house of Hai Duke still paid a great price to settle the matter. Today, seeing the second master of the Chun family like this, who was going to be in trouble? Chapter 797. At a suitable time, the whole family gathered around to make dumplings, which was a very romantic thing. Although they were not a family for the time being, the four of them sat around the stone table. On Li Yi's side were Miss Chun and Zheng Zumo, and Wan Ruoqing sat opposite him, talking and making dumplings. It was a happy and harmonious atmosphere. Miss Zheng didn't know how to make dumplings. Miss Chun was born in an official's family and had always been the daughter of a rich family. She had never cooked before, but after watching Li Yi and Wan Ruoqing make a few, she soon became good at making dumplings. Wan Ruoqing's dumplings were naturally the most beautiful of the four. Every dumpling was almost exactly the same. Compared with the strange shape of Zheng Zumo's, it was like heaven and earth. Li looked at the results on her table and sighed. If you make them like this, they will all fall apart when you put them in the pot. Who would want to eat them? Zheng Zumo looked at the others' dumplings on the table, and then looked at her own. She blushed and whispered, I made them myself. I can eat them myself. Li couldn't stand it anymore. After wrapping one, he directly grabbed her hand and put in the dough and stuffing. Look like this. First knead the two ends, then fold the dough at the back inward and knead them together with the front. Let go of me. Zheng Zumo looked up in panic. Seeing Wan Ruoqing and Mrs. Chun looking at her with a smile, her heart was beating fast, and her face was even redder. She whispered, I learned. Li clapped his hands, looked at her, and said, Then you make one and let me have a look. After a while, seeing a dumpling that was even worse than before, Li habitually rubbed his eyebrows and said helplessly, Forget it. You can make it however you want, haha. Xiao Chui, who was watching from the side, laughed out loud. She pointed at Li and said loudly, Li, you have an eye on your forehead. Only then did Li realize that he had forgotten that his hands were still stained with flour. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu giggled behind him. Third Miss Chun and Wan Ruoqing also looked at him with smiles on their faces. As for first Miss Zhang, she laughed even more unscrupulously. Li quickly reached out and wiped her face. The corners of his mouth twitched. Keep smiling, ah. After the scream, the expression on Zheng Zumo's face was stunned at first. Then she showed a look of shame and anger. She dipped her palm in flour and pounced on Li. However, with her skills, how could she be a match for Li? Li tilted his body and dodged her attack. He even wiped the other side of her face and laughed. That's more symmetrical. If I had another one on my forehead, I could directly go to the brothel to sing opera. I'm going to kill you. Wan Ruoqing and third Miss Chun continued to make dumplings, but there were two figures chasing each other in the yard, and there was a lot of chaos. The result of the flower fight was that Wan Ruoqing and third Miss Chun were making dumplings outside, while Li and first Miss Zhang were washing their faces inside. With Li Yi's skills, although he could ensure that he didn't get any flour on his body, he couldn't really do that. If he annoyed first Miss Zhang, his ending would be even worse. It's all your fault. Zheng Zumo took a handkerchief to wipe her face and threw it into the water. She glared at Li and said angrily. She was a woman, but she had actually played with him in the yard just now. Sister Ruoqing was fine because she was used to it. Mrs. Chen also saw it. Wasn't this a joke to her? Li wet the handkerchief, wrung it out, and wiped his face. He was very sensible and didn't argue. That's mine. Zheng Zumo widened her eyes and pointed at the handkerchief in his hand. Thinking that this wasn't the first time, she waved her hand and said, Forget it. Then she looked at Li Yi curiously and asked, "What's going on between you and Mrs. Chun?" Li Yi put down the handkerchief and stood up with a somewhat complicated expression. He sighed and said, "It's a long story. The matter wasn't complicated, but it was a bit difficult to talk about it. Although what happened 20 years ago wasn't caused by him, it had an inseparable relationship with him. Every time he thought about the current situation, he felt extremely uncomfortable." How? Zheng Zumo stood there in a daze. Her expression was a bit absent-minded as she murmured, "Mrs. Chun, she was a woman in the first place, so she could empathize with her. For a woman, this was such a cruel thing. 20 years ago, Madame Chun was about the same age as Xiao Chui, perhaps even 2 years younger than Xiao Chui. Now, it had already been 20 years. To think that the extremely kind Madame Chun would actually have such an encounter. Her head full of white hair had actually turned white in just one night. Her eyes were a bit moist. She looked at Li Yi and suddenly felt a bit angry. "You," Li Yi clarified, "not me. I didn't exist at that time." Zhang Zumo gritted her teeth and said, "You men are all the same. Using and then abandoning. Not a good thing." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'll say it again. Some men do like to use and then abandon, but they are them, and I am me. I will not use and then abandon." "You are. I am not." "Yes." "Say it again." "Yes." "Slap." Li Yi slapped her butt. "We'll talk about it later?" Zheng Zumo was stunned on the spot. A certain part of her body felt numb, but more of it was shame. Her pretty face was flushed, and even the roots of her ears were red. She looked up at Li Yi and said hatefully, "Yes." "Slap." Li Yi looked at her and asked again, "Is it?" "Yes." "Slap." "Yes, it is." "Slap. Slap. Slap." No. The numb feeling came again and again. Her face was so red that it seemed like it was about to drip blood, and her voice was already sobbing. Slap! Another wave of numbness came. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi in disbelief. I already said it's not." Li looked down at her and said with some embarrassment, "Sorry, I hit you casually. Why don't you say no again?" It was never too late to mend the fold after the sheep were lost. A prodigal son's repentance was more valuable than gold, and there was still a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. To be able to recognize one's mistakes was a good thing, and Li still had to learn from Miss Zheng on this point. "Miss, why is your face so red?" Xiao Chui asked Zheng Zumo in surprise when the two of them walked out of the backyard. Li Yi explained, "The water is too hot, and your miss is thin-skinned, so her face turned red." Xiao Chui nodded, not really understanding. She didn't know whether the water was hot or not, but she knew that every time the miss was alone with Li, her face would turn red. Wan Ruoqing looked at the dumplings on the plate and said, "It's just a few of us. We're almost done." When Li Yi helped to clean up the tray on the stone table, there was a sudden knock on the door. "Open the door. Open the door. Li Yi, don't hide. I know you're inside." Li Yi frowned, dusted off the flour on his hands, and walked toward the door. Third Miss Chun was startled and murmured, "Second brother?" At a certain moment, the knocking stopped. Chin Chong took a few steps back and looked at the two people who suddenly appeared in front of him. He asked, "Who are you?" The dozen guards behind him also looked at the two warily, as if they were facing a great enemy. One of the men said expressionlessly, "I want to ask, who are you, and what are you doing here?" Creak! The door opened from the inside, and Li Yi walked out. "Young master." The two men looked at him at the same time and lowered their heads slightly. Li nodded, then looked down and asked, "May I know what business you have here, Lord Supervisor?" Chin Chong's face was filled with anger. "You dare to ask me? Where's my third sister? Hand her over." "Second brother." Third Miss Chin hurried out and said, "Second brother, I'm fine." Chin Chong looked at her nervously and asked, "Meow you, did this bastard do anything to you?" Li looked at him, his eyes narrowed, and his fists clenched. He didn't offend anyone. So how did he become a bastard? If not for Third Miss Chin being here, he would definitely let this guy know what it meant to be a bastard. Chun Chong glanced at Li Yi, then supported Third Miss Chun and said, "Third sister, let's go. Follow second brother home." The preparations have already been made. We can't leave now. Third Miss Chun shook her head. Chun Chong frowned and said, don't mess around. Hurry and follow second brother home. The guests are all waiting. Third Miss Chun shook her head again and said, Meow, you just made some dumplings here. Why don't second brother stay and eat some with us? Dumplings? Chun Chong's expression froze. Third sister made them personally? He found it hard to believe. Ever since he was young, his third sister had never done such things. As the daughter of the Chun clan, who would dare to make her do such manual labor? Even as her elder brother, he had never eaten the dumplings she made personally. Third Miss Chun waved her powder-stained hands and said with some embarrassment, I just learned how to make them, so I didn't do it well. Chun Chong stood there in a daze. After thinking about it, he nodded slightly. Then eat some. Chapter 798. Since the third young lady had spoken, Li naturally could not ignore her and shut Chong Chen outside the door. Come in. Li only glanced at Chong Chen and said expressionlessly. Although he was a magnanimous man and did not mind what Chong Chen had said to him, his expression was naturally not pleasant. He was having a good meal here, and this shameless outsider had the nerve to come over. Halfway there, he realized that the dumplings had run out. The dumplings made by 4 people were only enough for 4 people and 2 servant girls. With the addition of 1 more person, it was not quite enough. Turning back, he looked at Chong Chen and said calmly, the dumplings are out. Lord Chun, go and buy some more. You, as a dignified minister with the backing of the House of Duke, when had he ever been ordered around like this? Anger appeared on Chong Chen's face. He was about to flare up when the third young lady waved her hand and said with a smile, I'll ask Xiao to buy some. She just bought some and knows the place. Let me go. Chong Chun shook his head. Third young lady had personally made the dumplings. How could the fillings bought by a servant girl compare to the ones he had bought? He was just dissatisfied with the rascal's attitude. After glaring at Li, he strode out. The third young lady took a few steps forward and looked at the 2 girls. She said apologetically, I am a guest, and made the decision without permission. I hope Zue Mo and Ruoqing will not take it to heart. No. Ruoqing shook her head and said with a smile, it's just an extra pair of chopsticks. In Li Yi's view, this was not just an extra pair of chopsticks. Every time Qin Chong, this arrogant fellow, saw him, it was as if he was talking through his nostrils. This made him very uncomfortable. However, in terms of rank, a 5th-rank official was 4 ranks lower than him. Who gave him this confidence? If she saw him walking around in front of her, this meal would lose some of its flavor. However, he did not want to make things difficult for the third young lady. So he shook his head and walked to the kitchen. Although they were eating dumplings today, they couldn't just eat dumplings. Other than the main course, they had to stir-fry a dozen dishes and make some soup. Not far from Willow Lane, there was a food market. The people of the capital had seen people buying meat stuffing, but they had never seen a mighty group of more than 10 people. The person at the head of the group was dressed in luxurious clothing, and his expression was not angry, but dignified. One look, and you could tell that he was a high-ranking official. To arrange such a large group to come to the market was just to buy 2 tails of meat stuffing. Heavens, am I seeing things? That person just now seems to be Supervisor Chun. Which Supervisor Chun? There's another Chun informant. The one from Duke Chen's residence. Yesterday, he brought a few dozen people to kick down the door of Ning Yuan Ho's residence. Impossible. What kind of status does he have? How could he come here to buy minced meat? How? Is it impossible? I saw him with my own eyes yesterday. As the crowd discussed, the butcher shop assistant was already leaning against a pillar in the shop. He couldn't stop himself from sliding down. Duke Chun, Supervisor Chun. These words were enough to make a commoner like him, who had never seen the world, go weak in the knees. Supervisor Chun naturally didn't know and didn't care about the commotion on the street. At this moment, he was sitting around the table in the small courtyard. He asked with concern, Miao, you've packed so much. Are you tired? Do you want to rest for a while? Zheng Zumo and Wan Ruoqing stood far away on the other side. They withdrew their gazes and looked at each other, seeing the surprise and confusion in each other's eyes. The person who was at Madame Chen's beck and call, asking about her well-being, was he really the current supervisor, Chen? However, when they thought about the fact that the one cooking in the kitchen was a third-rank Dr. Jinzi Wang, a fifth-rank supervisor, Chen didn't mean much. There was another knock on the door. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu were busy in the kitchen. Zheng Zumo walked over and opened the courtyard door. Zumo. Zheng Shichen walked in with a smile on his face. He saw two figures he had never seen before at the stone table in the courtyard. He was startled and immediately said, "Are there any guests? I'll leave first then. I won't disturb you anymore. I'll come back tomorrow." He turned around and walked out the door. Only then did a voice come from behind him. "Wait a moment." Zheng Shichen turned around with a puzzled expression. "Is there anything else, Zumo?" Zheng Zumo looked at him with a hesitant expression. She quickly lowered her head and said in a small voice, "Since you're here, let's have a meal before you leave." Zheng Shichen turned around and looked around. When he found that he was the only one here, his body suddenly trembled. He pointed at himself in disbelief and asked, Me? Come in first." Zheng Zumo nodded and slowly walked into the courtyard. Okay. Zheng Shichen stood in place for a long time before nodding. There was a trace of joy on his face as he strode in. The first 2 times he drank a cup of herbal tea, but this time he could even eat a meal. This speed of progress made him feel as if he was in a dream. "Assistant Minister Zheng, why are you here?" An extremely surprised voice rang out in front of him. Zheng Shichen felt that this voice was somewhat familiar. When he looked up, he said in shock, "Official Chun, why are you here?" Seeing Chun Chong here, a trace of wariness flashed across his face. Almost subconsciously, he took a step forward and stood in front of Zheng Zumo. "What are you doing?" Chen Chong glanced at him in confusion, but the expression on his face quickly turned into one of schadenfreude. "I only bought 2 ounces of stuffing. If you want to eat, go buy it yourself." Zheng Shichen looked back. Seeing that Zheng Zumo was fine, he finally relaxed. When he turned back, confusion once again appeared on his face. "What do you mean, Official Chun?" Chen Chong glanced at him. "What do I mean? If you want to eat, go buy it yourself. There's no extra here." He had long been dissatisfied with the fact that an official of the court was ordered to buy meat stuffing. If he could order around a 4th-rank assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, he would naturally feel better. He poked his head out of the kitchen and saw Zheng Shichen standing in the yard. He knew that there was going to be another eyesore today. Zheng Zumo shook her head and said, "I'll have Xiao Chui go buy it." Zheng Shichen had already understood the ins and outs of the matter. After seeing Li Yi, his worried heart also relaxed. He smiled and said, "Since Official Chen does it himself, I won't break the rules. I'll go out for a bit and be back soon." Inside the market, the butcher had just walked out of the shadow brought by the official when he saw a customer walk in. "Sir, what would you like to order?" 2 ounces of meat stuffing," a middle-aged man in a dark robe said. The waiter wiped the cloth around his waist and said, "All right, please wait a moment, sir. I'll cut it up right away." "Assistant Minister Zhang, is it really you?" Hearing the voice behind him, Zheng Shichen turned around and saw the man walking in. He looked left and right and said in surprise, "Censor Qi?" Since last year, the censors of the Imperial Censorate especially liked to wear casual clothes and wander the streets. It wasn't strange to see an supervising censor in the market. Censor Qi looked at him in surprise. "Sir Zhang, what are you doing?" Zheng Shichen smiled and said, "Buying 2 ounces of meat stuffing to make dumplings." That Censor Qi's face revealed a look of surprise. He cupped his hands and said, "I really didn't expect that Sir Zhang, as an assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, would be so thrifty. You must have come to this kind of place in order to sympathize with the people, investigate the prices of goods, and punish illegal peddlers, right?" Zheng Shichen's expression froze. Censor Qi was immediately filled with respect. When Sir Zhang was in charge of the yamen, he still went deep into the people to understand the people's feelings. He is truly a role model for us officials. I will write a memorial tomorrow. Ministry of Revenue, assistant minister? Punish illegal peddlers? The butcher stood in a daze behind the stall. His face was pale, and his body trembled. The meat stuffing in his hand fell to the chopping board, and he fell to his knees. He shouted, "Sir, you have wronged me. I'm only a worker." About the matter of raising the price of meat, he pointed a finger at the fat, middle-aged man behind him. "It was all done by my shopkeeper." Sung Shichin cupped his hands at Sensor Chi and said, "Sir Chi is too kind. I still have some matters to attend to, so I will take my leave first." Sensor Chi also cupped his hands. "Take care, Sir Zong." Sung Shichin took out a few copper coins and placed them on the chopping board. He picked up the meat stuffing and left without looking at the butcher. The butcher kneeled on the ground. He could only hear the sound of teeth grinding behind him. "Wong ergo." He turned around and saw that the shopkeeper had taken a boning knife from the wall and was glaring at him fiercely. "Raising the price of meat? I will chop you up." Chapter 799. The dumplings were all wrapped up and were just waiting to be put into the pot. Third young Mistress Chun and the two maidservants sat in the courtyard and chatted. The chores in the kitchen were almost done. The two maidservants could not interfere in the following matters and stood at the back, pouring tea and water. Li Yi busied himself in the kitchen, while Chun Chong and Sang Shichin stood at the entrance of the kitchen, watching. The assistant minister of revenue, Sang Shichin, still had a look of surprise on his face. He shook his head and said, "If my colleagues in court were to find out that the dignified dean of the Mathematics Academy, Grand Scholar Jean Ziguang Liu, is actually doing this kind of kitchen work, I wonder how many jaws would drop." Chun Chong snorted coldly, his eyes filled with disdain as he said, "It's clearly an insult to the culture. It's more likely they'll laugh their heads off." Damn it, he had always disliked this guy. Not only did he not make a move, but he was also standing here making sarcastic remarks. Li looked back and said indifferently, "Come over and peel off those scallions." Chun Chong sneered, "Are you ordering this official? If you don't want to peel it, then please leave." He didn't even turn his head. "I think you're used to living a luxurious life. You probably won't care about a plate of dumplings." "Where's the green onion?" "The corner." After marinating the fish, Li Yi said, "If Zung Darren has nothing else to do, why don't you mash those cloves of garlic in a garlic paste?" "All right." Sing Shichin readily agreed without any resistance. In the courtyard, Miss Chen looked at Zung Zumo and said in confusion, "Zumo and Assistant Minister Zung are both surnamed Zung. Could it be?" Zung Zumo smiled and said, "It's all in the past." Third Miss Chun saw that her expression was a little gloomy, so she didn't ask further. The three of them chatted about something else. From time to time, sounds could be heard coming from the kitchen not far away. "I asked you to peel the scallions, not to peel them all. Look at the scallions you peeled. What's left?" This was Li Yi's angry voice. "You dare to shout at this official." Chen Chong's voice was similarly enraged. "What's wrong with that? Do you have a problem with that? This official? You have something to say, right? If you have something to say, go out and say it. Forget it, forget it. There are only a few green onions left. There's nothing for you to waste. Go, take this trash out and throw it away." "What do you mean by supervisor? You can't do anything right, but you're good at spoiling things. You can only throw trash away." Chun Chong angrily walked out of the kitchen with a dustpan in hand. After taking 2 steps, he turned back and asked, "Where should I throw it?" Wan Ruoqing stared blankly in a certain direction. She hesitated for a moment before asking, "There." Third Miss Chen shook her head and said, "It doesn't matter. Let them be. It will be more lively this way." She looked at the 2 women with a smile on her face and asked, "You must have known that child for a long time, right?" Sung Zumo was confused. "Which child?" Wan Ruoqing smiled and nodded. "We first met in Qing and Fu. It has been almost 2 years since then." While the 3 of them were talking about these things, a fragrant aroma gradually drifted out of the kitchen. Usually, there were only the 4 of them in the small courtyard. Most of their meals were at the stone table in the courtyard. If the weather was bad, they would eat inside the house. Li Yi would occasionally eat here, so it wouldn't be crowded with one more person at the table. Any more, and it would be hard to sit down. As outsiders, Assistant Minister Zeng, and Supervisor Chun could only sit at the stone table outside. This was a special seat for distinguished guests that Li Yi had specially arranged for them. After they sat down, Li Yi took a few bites and then stood up. Everyone, eat first. I'll go cook the dumplings. Wan Ruoqing stood up. I'll go help. You guys eat. I can do it alone. Li Yi shook his head and walked toward the kitchen. Third Miss Chen's gaze moved away from the door and asked, "Does he often cook?" "He never cares about what outsiders say. When he was in Qing and Fu, he often cooked himself." Wan Ruoqing nodded and asked, "Is the food to your liking?" A gratified smile appeared on Third Miss Chen's face. Even the imperial chefs in the palace are only SOSO. The three of them talked for a while. After a while, Zheng Zumo looked outside with some confusion and murmured, "Why isn't he back yet? I'll go and see." She got up and walked out of the courtyard, heading in the direction of the kitchen. In the kitchen, Li Yi added a fire under the stove and washed his hands in a basin on the side. Then, he picked up the bowl and ate the dumplings in the bowl one mouthful at a time. Let's call them dumplings for now. The dumplings made by Miss Zeng looked like dumplings before they were put into the pot. After they were put into the pot, they were a mixture of dough, meat filling, and water. The taste was really the most unique dumplings he had ever eaten. "Well done. We're all waiting for you inside, and you're actually stealing food here." A surprised and excited voice came from behind. Then, Li Yi's wrist was grabbed by someone. Miss Zeng looked at Li Yi with a proud expression, as if she had caught a thief who had stolen something. "What's stealing food? You're a girl. Watch your words." Li Yi was still holding the bowl in his hand. He said, "Don't move. Be careful not to spill it." It was very rare to see Li Yi embarrassed. Miss Zeng raised her chin and said with a little pride, "You were stealing food, and I caught you. You still want to deny it." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Please, stealing food is a matter of two people. One person can't do it. Why can't one person do it?" Zheng Zumo looked at him with some confusion. As soon as she said this, she understood what he had just said. Her face turned red, and she glared at him. She whispered, "Letcher, don't worry about stealing food." Li Yi put down the bowl and said, "The dumplings are almost ready. Help me bring them in later." Zheng Zumo walked to the front of the stove and said, "I want to eat the dumplings I made." "You made them?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "I threw them away. They are all scattered in the pot. How can I bring them up?" "You." Zheng Zumo looked at him with some embarrassment. Those were the dumplings she had painstakingly made. Although they were not good-looking, it was still her first time. How could he? Her eyes inadvertently caught a glimpse of the bowl that Li Yi had placed on the side, and her expression was slightly startled. Of course, there were not dumplings in the bowl. The dough and meat were scattered, and there was no dumpling shape at all. The only one that was somewhat similar was a dumpling with two round ears, which she had made herself. "You." Her voice softened, and she lowered her head, not daring to look at Li Yi. Although she was a little flustered and bewildered at the moment, there was another kind of sweet and warm feeling in her heart. Li took out the bowl and chopsticks, intending to rinse it with water again. He said, "Help me keep an eye on it. When the water boils twice more, you can put into the pot." "Okay." Zheng Zumo nodded and made a vague syllable from her throat. She stood on tiptoe and leaned over to look into the pot. When she made such a posture, her body would naturally bend down in an arc. This familiar arc made Li Yi's hand feel a strange feeling, and his mind couldn't help but recall the scene in the morning. When Zheng Zumo inadvertently turned her head, she saw that he was staring at a certain part of her body. Her body stiffened, and that part seemed to begin to become numb again. Her breathing was a little rapid, and she said angrily, "Where are your eyes looking?" "Ahem, ahem." Li Yi coughed dryly, looked at the pot, and said, "It's about time. Let's start the pot." Zheng Zumo's face was blushing. She looked back and whispered, "It's not boiling yet. It's not boiling yet. It's not bad." In addition to the dumplings, the dishes on the table were also very sumptuous. They were originally packed according to the number of people. Li Yi brought out the last bowl of dumplings and said with a smile, "Everyone try the taste first. Delicious." Xiao Chui ate a dumpling. Although it was scalded and kept sucking in air, Her chopsticks had already reached out. Her eyes inadvertently glanced at Li Yi, and, as if she had discovered something, she pointed at the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "Li, did you secretly eat in the kitchen just now?" Splash. Hearing the words secretly eat, Zheng Zumo's wrist trembled, and the dumpling she had already picked up fell back into the bowl. In the courtyard, next to the stone table, Chen Chong picked up a dumpling, dipped it in vinegar, and took a bite. Then he was startled, raised his head, and asked doubtfully, "Assistant Minister Zheng, don't you feel that this dumpling is a little raw?" Chapter 800. I think it's okay. Sung Shichen shook his head. Although official Chun has some old grudges with Marquis Li, what sort of person is he? Why would he use such a method to take revenge on you? I think so too. Chen Chong nodded and swallowed the entire dumpling. Sung Shichen smiled. He picked up a dumpling, a smile on his face. But when he put it into his mouth, his smile froze. Swallowing with difficulty, Sung Shichen put down his chopsticks. He looked at Chen Chong and said, "Official Chun, this dumpling seems a little raw." A quarter of an hour later, the two returned to their original positions. Who would have thought that two high officials of the court would personally start a fire and boil water for a few half-cooked dumplings? Official Chun, your face, haha. Assistant Minister Zheng is not much better. Let him be, we'll talk after eating. Sing Shichen picked up a dumpling, dipped it in vinegar, and asked, "If I remember correctly, today should be third young Mrs. birthday. Why is official Chen not at home? Why is he here?" Chen Chong ate the dumpling and said expressionlessly, after he was released from office, "Official Zheng did not return home. Was he observing the people? Or—" He looked into the room and said in astonishment, "Could it be that Miss Tseng is Sir Tseng's illegitimate daughter who was left behind by the common people? Speaking of which, why do I feel that between Sir Tseng and her, there is actually official Chun? If there is nothing important in the future, do not come here." Sung Shichen interrupted him. He looked at him and said, "If there is something, official Chun is the minister of the imperial court and is very busy. Why would he need to come to this small willow lane? Don't you think so?" Chen Chong put down his chopsticks, his eyes narrowing. "Assistant Minister Zhang, what do you mean?" Sung Shichen put down his chopsticks and met his gaze. "I have a personal relationship with the former Assistant Minister of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan." The former Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Zhao Guangyuan, accepted bribes for personal gain and is still imprisoned in the imperial prison. A dangerous light flashed in Chen Chong's eyes as he said in a low voice, "What does this have to do with what Lord Xing said? It's very normal for Lord Chun to not admit to this matter. After all, even Assistant Minister Zhao of the Ministry of Justice fell from power in a muddle-headed manner. He did not know that the person behind it was actually Lord Chun." Song Shichen shook his head and said, "I have no other intentions in saying these words. I just want to tell Lord Chun." He looked into the room, and a hint of warmth flashed across his face. When he turned back, his eyes were cold. "Stay away from drunk ink." Chun Chong's eyes narrowed, and he said word by word, "Sung Shichen, are you threatening me?" "I don't dare." Sung Shichen's expression had already calmed down. He saluted and said, "Lord Chun has the House of High Dukes behind him. How would I dare to threaten Lord Chun? It's just that Zumo is the only descendant of my big brother in this world. I can't let anything happen to her. Although the Zheng family is small, if Lord Chun insists, the House of High Dukes will not be happy. Your big brother, Zheng Shiji?" Chun Chong glanced at him and murmured, "I see." He picked up his chopsticks again, shook his head, and said, "Back then, I felt that you were more suitable to be an official than your big brother. Back then, the Zheng family was suppressed and ostracized by the former Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Later, they were framed and their salaries were touched. The Zheng family's direct line of descent suffered. No wonder, no wonder. Later, the former Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue was found by the Imperial Censorate to have accepted large amounts of bribes and was sentenced to 500 miles of exile. I'm afraid this road to hell is more than 500 miles. Sang Shichen shook his head and said, only Assistant Minister Fong himself knows this. Chun Chong ate another dumpling and said casually, "The Intelligence Bureau has not found out about that matter." "How did you know?" Sung Shichen smiled and did not speak. "I thought that Lord Zeng had relied on the support of the Chui family and the King of Shu to climb from a small head of the Ministry of Revenue to where he is now. It seems that I have underestimated Lord Zeng." Chun Chong shook his head and picked up his chopsticks. "To express my apology, here, a dumpling to you." Sung Shichen also picked up his chopsticks and nodded. "Thank you, Lord Chun." The invisible confrontation between the two of them had been resolved by these two dumplings. For them, there were some things that did not need to be said. They had already reached a consensus on that dumpling. As Chun Chong ate the dumplings, his gaze would occasionally glance into the room. From here, he could faintly see what was going on in the room. Although he could not clearly hear the contents of the conversation, he could still hear the occasional light laughter of the woman. Chun Chong's gaze paused on the face of the white-haired woman. She was currently smiling and talking to the woman beside her. This kind of smile, how long had it been since he had seen it on her face? Even when he held a birthday banquet for her every year that would shake the entire capital in terms of grandeur and grandeur, even noble consort Chui's birthday banquet could not compare to it. He had never seen such a smile on her face. Of course, she often smiled, but that kind of smile made him feel even more sad. In the next moment, his gaze landed on the only young man in the room. Sang Shichen's gaze was also in the room, but it fell on the other woman. Back then, the little girl who only knew how to follow behind him and call him second uncle, had already grown into such a person. In the past, Big Brother often grumbled at him, complaining that he had spoiled her too much, causing his daughter to treat him, this second uncle, more than her father. However, it had been a whole 13 years since he had heard her call him second uncle. Sung Shichen sighed in his heart, his gaze also turning to that young man. Both of their gazes were extremely complicated. At a certain moment, when the two of them retracted their gazes met in the air. Some things are better left unsaid when there are so many people around. Sung Shichen finished the last dumpling and put down his chopsticks. Chun Chong picked up another dumpling. Assistant Minister Tsang, there is no harm in speaking. Lord Chun, what do you think of the chances of the King of Shu succeeding? Chun Chong's chopsticks were about to enter his mouth, but his body trembled when he heard this, and he put the dumpling back into the bowl. As both core members of the King of Shu's faction, it was very normal for the two of them to analyze the current situation and plan for the King of Shu. However, both of them knew that this time was completely different from the past. Chun Chong said in a low voice, when the King of Shu was in the capital, his actions had already bitterly disappointed countless supporters in the court. Those who were wavering probably also gave up on that idea. Sung Shichen continued, in the future, the School of Mathematics will definitely be heavily relied upon by the court. Minister Qin has said many times that the Ministry of Revenue should recruit more talent from the School of Mathematics. However, in the School of Mathematics, there is no one from the King of Shu's faction. The person in charge is Prince Jin. After the accounts were checked, the King of Shu and the Chui clan's power in the court was almost completely wiped out. Their arrangements over the decades were destroyed in a day. The Chui clan's foundation was almost destroyed by foreign merchants. They could not interfere in the matter of the School of Mathematics, and they have lost the support of the people. Prime Minister Qin's attitude has been ambiguous recently. The most frightening thing is His Majesty's attitude. The eldest princess is temporarily in charge of the court, and the King of Shu is not allowed to return to the capital for noble consort Chui's birthday. But if the King of Shu is defeated and a new emperor takes the throne, what will happen to the Chun clan and the Zeng clan in the future? The voices of the two of them became softer and softer, and their expressions became darker and darker. In the hall, Li Yi brought over a bowl of longevity noodles that he had personally cooked. He smiled and said, I wish you a happy birthday. This kind of birthday greeting was extremely hasty, but Third Miss Chen's face was full of smiles. She took the small bowl from his hand and held his hand. She nodded and said, Good, good. Chapter 801. Duke Chin's Residence. Although night had yet to fall, the entire Chun residence was filled with jubilation. The residence was decorated with lanterns and colored banners. Guests arrived and chatted with each other. Servants and maids walked among them, serving delicacies and wine. The atmosphere was joyous. To the Chin residence, today was even more lively than the New Year, Lantern Festival, and Mid-Autumn Festival. This lowly official greets Lord Chun. Today, there's only Chun Qing, not Lord Chun. Long time no see. Congratulations on your promotion, Lord Chun. Today is my youngest sister's birthday. Let's not talk about these things. Sit over there. Lord Qin, welcome. Chui Lu, bring Madame Qin to the ladies in the inner courtyard. The Chun family status in the imperial court was not low, and it could even be said that it played an important role. This was not only because of Minister Qin's prestige and connections in the past, but also because the Chun brothers held important positions in the imperial court. One was a minister, and the other was now an official's attendant. Anyone who was invited to today's banquet more or less had the intention to curry favor with them. Chun Qing personally welcomed a few important guests, then turned around and frowned. What time is it? Why haven't third sister and second brother returned yet? A servant replied respectfully, Master, second master went out to fetch third miss a long time ago. I don't know why, but there's been no news yet. The banquet is about to begin. Send someone out to take a look. Yes. Chun Qing gave an order, and the servant immediately retreated and ran out of the mansion. In Willow Alley, third Miss Chun walked out of the courtyard and smiled at the two girls. I still have to thank you for your hospitality today. Sorry for the trouble. Wan Ruoqing bowed slightly and said, You are too polite. It is just a simple meal. Although it is simple, it is better than all the luxurious clothes and food. Third Miss Chun looked at Li Yi, who was standing at the back. After a long time, she said, It is getting late. We have disturbed you for so long. We should go back. Be careful. Chen Xiong helped her down the stairs and looked back at Li Yi. His brows were still furrowed, but there was no longer the intense hostility from before. Drunk ink, I'm going back too. Sing Shichen smiled, then turned and walked towards the entrance of the alley. When this assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue and Minister Chun parted ways at the mouth of the alley, they looked at each other again. After exchanging some information, they got into their respective carriages. In the courtyard, Li Yi and Zheng Zumo sat on either side of the stone table. Seeing this third young lady again today made his heart feel uneasy again. The Chen family had always been the most solid force of the king of Shu's faction. It was also a force that he and the eldest princess could not avoid in the future. However, the Chun family was different from the Chui family, the Yu family, and the Qin family. The Li family owed third Miss Qin too much. Since ancient times, conflicts between factions had always been cold-blooded and heartless. However, if they really used unscrupulous means to achieve their goals and cause her to suffer even a little more harm, even if their ultimate goal was achieved, they would never be able to live in peace for the rest of their lives. This matter needed to be discussed at length. Sang Zumo put a cup of tea on the table in front of him, looked at him, and said softly, Are you still thinking about Mrs. Chun? Li took a sip of tea and nodded slightly. She thought about it and said, This matter is not your fault. Li shook his head, but it is still related to me. Fang's head had poked in twice from outside. Li looked up and said, It's getting late. Aye, she nodded. Well, you can go back. I have a lot of things to do in the next few days. I may not have much time to come. Rui's due date was less than 3 months. Li did not intend to let the old lady and the other women take her to pray for Buddha's blessing all day. After a pause, he said, If there's anything urgent, send someone to find me. The new house is not far from here. You should know where it is, right? Then, wait a minute. She was stunned and hesitated for a moment. Then she turned around and walked quickly back to the room. Soon she came out and handed something to Li Yi, saying, It's not good. It's not as good as Sister Ruoqing. If you don't like it, throw it away. Li Yi looked at the baby clothes in his hand. It was indeed not as good as the one made by Ruoqing, but compared with the one she made before, it was like heaven and earth. Her needlework was just like her culinary skills. It was incredible that she could make such great progress in such a short period of time. It was enough to guess how much effort she had put into this area these days. Let me see. He grabbed her left hand, and sure enough, there were quite a few dark red spots on her white, jade-like fingers. This time, she did not struggle. Seeing his slightly distressed expression, a smile appeared on her face. The dull pain in her hand did not hurt so much. At the door of the room in the back, a figure had come out. Seeing the situation in the courtyard, he slowly retreated. He was a little touched and angry. He sighed and said, "Don't be so silly in the future." She shook her head and said, "It's never wrong to learn more things. Besides, in the future, I have to do a few things for my child." "That's true." He nodded and said, "But you have to be careful. No one is like you, hurting your hand when making clothes. Anyway, it's still early. If you do it slowly, there will be a lot of clothes. It will save me the trouble of buying them outside." She slightly lowered her head, feeling a little disappointed. Yes, the only thing she could do was to sew a few small clothes for him and Miss Lu's child. She subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand from Li's hand, but he held it even tighter. Li looked down at her and asked, "Do you want to have a son or a daughter?" "I think a daughter is better, but it's not up to us. When the time comes, it still depends on luck." Hearing this, her body trembled, and then her face immediately turned red. She struggled even harder to break free from Li's hand. Who wants to have a child with you?" Li could only see the back of a panicked, fleeing figure. He said helplessly, "Why are you running?" In the future, not now." Some things were vague. It would indeed save a lot of trouble if it was not said or poked through the layer of paper. But this was very unfair to her. As a man, he was a little less responsible. The timing was not very right. But in the coming days, he had a lot of things to do. It would be difficult for them to meet again. Li thought for a long time and still felt that it was better to say these words. "Miss, why are you covered in the blanket? Is it very cold?" Inside the room, Xiao Chui stood in front of the bed and looked at the figure who was curled up in the blanket. She listened carefully and heard a low, sobbing sound coming from under the quilt. "Miss, are you crying?" Panic immediately appeared on her face, and she said anxiously, "Did Li bully you?" "Miss, don't cry. I'll go find him now." "Don't." A figure quickly jumped up from the bed. Zheng Zumo grabbed Xiao Chui's arm, and her face was full of tears. She shook her head repeatedly. "Don't go, it's not his fault." "It's me," Xiao Chui asked doubtfully. "But miss, why are you crying?" Because... She looked out of the window in a daze, then held Xiao Chui in her arms and whispered, "Because today's dumplings are too delicious." The young girl's face revealed an extremely surprised expression. She cried like this because the dumplings were delicious. In the past 10 years, she had never realized that the young miss actually liked to eat dumplings so much. In the courtyard, a figure sat at the stone table in a daze, looking at the full moon that had already risen into the sky. There was a smile on his face, and his clear eyes were like a pool of green water, but there were sparkles flashing in them. Fong sat in the carriage and looked back at the carriage. He sighed and said, "Son-in-law, you're so wise. It's too troublesome to have a boy and have to raise him up to marry him. I also think it's better to have a daughter." Chapter 802. Husband, you came back a little later than usual today. In the room, candlelight flickered. Li moved the wooden basin away, helped Rui dry her feet, and covered her with the quilt. Then he said, "I was indeed delayed by something today." He roughly told Rui what had happened that day. Rui leaned against the headboard and curled her feet under the quilt. She said, "Speaking of which, I haven't seen Mrs. Chun for a long time." Li sighed. He didn't know what to say for a while. "I'm just a woman. I shouldn't say anything." Rui looked at him and said, "But I think that in the future, no matter what happens to the Li family and the Chun family, we must treat Mrs. Chun well." Li nodded. The complexity of this matter couldn't be explained in a few words. He gently picked up Rui, laid her on the bed, and covered her with the quilt. He said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early, my wife." Rui nodded and closed her eyes obediently. Good night, husband. Good night. Li Yi kissed her gently on the forehead. He walked over to turn off the light and left the room. The moon was very bright that night. There were lanterns hanging in the courtyard, so it wasn't very dark. Li took some dessert from the kitchen and a pot of grape wine. He sat at the stone table in the courtyard. He had cooked a lot today, but he didn't eat much. He was a little hungry now. He ate the desserts and drank the wine, thinking about something. Many things had happened these days. He needed to think about them from time to time. The most important thing was to find another job for Old Fong. With a grandmaster like Su Lao by his side, his existence seemed a lot more unnecessary. Secondly, since the old emperor handed over the affairs of the court to the eldest princess, he really didn't care about anything. He moved to Hibiscus Garden with the empress, Yin Fei, and the others, and retired early. According to the eldest princess, he actually asked the imperial guards to open up a vegetable garden in Hibiscus Garden. He had already planted the seeds himself. When spring came next year, he would be able to eat the vegetables he grew himself. Other than that, he played on the streets with Shanning and Yongning every day under the protection of a group of hidden guards. He led the dogs up the mountain to chase rabbits and set traps to catch pheasants. Of course, he didn't chase them himself. He was starting to wonder if things really turned in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme. The old emperor had been working hard his whole life, but in his old age, he had completely let himself loose and neglected his duties. If this went on, he would not be able to keep his chastity. However, after staying away from the affairs of court, he went to bed early and woke up early every day. Even the frequency of his illness was reduced. Li didn't remind him too much about this. Winter was coming, and at that time, he would have to obediently stay in Hibiscus Garden like a turtle. Winter was the season of asthma. If he survived this winter, there would be hope for the next year. Li was also worried about the eldest princess, who was personally in charge of the court affairs. Although she often participated in the court affairs, it was the first time that she was acting in the place of the emperor. There would be too many problems in the process. Therefore, during this period, whether it was Li Yi entering the palace or the eldest princess leaving the palace, they were very frequent. Moreover, apart from the court affairs, the two of them had other more important things to discuss. Of course, these things were secrets only the two of them could know. They couldn't let others hear about it. Li Xian couldn't, and the old emperor couldn't. Besides, there was something else about himself. For him, compared to other things, this matter was more troublesome. Mississippi Lu, who was wearing a thin shirt, came over and sat opposite him. She pinched a piece of pastry and poured herself a glass of grape wine. She was very busy these days and often didn't eat at home. There were not many opportunities for the two of them to sit quietly and face each other like this. When she poured the second glass of wine, she slowly said, "I'm out of silver. Take 100,000 taels first. We'll talk about it if it's not enough." Lu Meng was his family's power. He wouldn't be stingy on spending money on this. He gave her the silver, and she could do whatever she wanted. She didn't expect him to be so straightforward this time. Mississippi Lu looked at him in surprise. Rui, Li thought for a moment, suddenly sat up straight and looked at her. "I have a question to ask you." Mississippi Lu pinched another piece of pastry and said lightly, "Speak. I have a friend." Li looked at her and said seriously, "This friend of mine has encountered some troubles recently." Mississippi Lu looked at him calmly and waited for him to continue. Li looked at her and continued, "This friend of mine has fallen in love with a woman. That woman is very good, but he has a wife. His wife is very gentle and beautiful. He also loves his wife very much. This friend of yours, don't tell me his surname, is also Li?" Mississippi Lu suddenly looked at him and asked. Li nodded and said, "It's just a coincidence." "A coincidence? This friend of yours, other than that woman, had a lot of women outside?" Li thought for a moment and counted with his fingers under the stone table. He shook his head and said, "Not a lot. It's also a coincidence that this friend of yours, other than his wife, has a powerful and beautiful wife-sister and a lovely servant girl." Li shook his head. "Ha! How can there be so many coincidences? Whose coincidences are they?" Mississippi Lou lowered her head and poured another cup of wine. She asked, "Are there any other questions?" "None." Lee stood up and turned to walk 2 steps. He then turned back and said, "The night is cold. Don't sit for too long. Rest early. Morning dew hall." After His Majesty left the palace, although Her Highness the eldest princess had been acting as the court's administrator, she did not live in the hall of diligent government. Usually, the memorials sent by the minister of Shangshu would be sent to the palace where she lived. "You have to continue following up on the matter of papermaking, but I think it should be done soon. In 2 days' time." He spread out a piece of paper and wrote and drew on it. Lowering the price of paper is a good thing for the scholars of the world. It is also a sharp weapon to rope in the scholars. The Academy has already begun preparations in the various provinces. When the time comes, there will naturally be people who will publicize what you have done in the capital. Once these 2 things are done, it will almost be enough to win the hearts of the scholars of the world. Continue to send people to the Yu family every day. They will definitely continue to raise the price of paper. When the price reaches a certain level, they will definitely be tempted and start to stock up. Because if the Academy uses that price to buy their paper, the entire operation of the Academy will collapse. They will kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, we will definitely not let them kill 2 birds with 1 stone. After the new cheap and good quality paper is released, the Yu family's paper mill will collapse, and the paper they have in stock won't be sold. The Yu family. It just so happens that winter is coming. We won't starve to death with the Chui family. We will have company and won't be lonely. After listening to him, Emingzi nodded, but her face showed some confusion. She looked at Li Yi and asked seriously, "Can I really do it?" Li looked around and moved closer to her. He said in a small voice, "Don't think about these things now. What we need to do now is to let His Majesty know, let all the civil and military officials know, that what His Majesty can do, you can also do it, and you can do it better, even better than all the previous emperors of the past dynasties. This is something that happens subtly. We already have a lot now. Even if we encounter some resistance in the future, at that time, that little bit of resistance won't be a big deal." He had also seriously thought about it. Compared to the legendary figure, the eldest princess, whether it was her identity, position, or the power in her hands, was much greater. It could be said that she was truly a good seedling. The only thing she lacked might be that kind of temperament and means. Of course, he also did not want the eldest princess to have that kind of temperament and means. She only needed to be responsible for completing the task given to her by His Majesty and being as beautiful as a flower. As for other things, there was him. "No, you have to make it clear to me today." Li Xian didn't seem to be so easy to fool this time. He looked at the 2 of them with a sullen face. Originally, it was a matter of the 3 of them together. Suddenly, one day he was pushed out. The 3 heroes of the capital had become the 2 heroes of the capital. This kind of feeling could not be understood unless one experienced it personally. Li looked at him. He didn't know what to say. Of course, it was impossible to tell the truth. This was no small matter. Even Li Xian couldn't know about it. He couldn't even think about it in that direction. This reason was not easy to come up with in Li Xian's mind. He couldn't help but think about the various states between Li Yi and Imingzi over the past few days. Or rather, signs, as well as their intimate appearance when he came in just now. At this moment, Li Yi and Imingzi seemed to have thought of something. One of them was stuttering, and the other was lowering her head in silence. A thought flashed through his mind. Could it be? He looked at the 2 of them suspiciously. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't have guessed this kind of thing. Mingzhu's face also showed a trace of unnaturalness. Li Yi's nervousness and Mingzhu's panic naturally didn't escape Li Xian's eyes. Seeing this scene, his heart was almost certain of his guess. He blurted out, "Could it be there's something going on between the 2 of you?" Li Yi's expression froze. "What?" Mingzhu raised her head to look at Li Xian. Still pretending. Li Xian looked at the 2 of them with a face full of agitation. He had an expression that said, "Stop pretending." "I knew it." There's definitely something going on between the two of you. Li looked at him in a daze. No, when we were in Qing, in prefecture, I knew that the two of you sooner or later. Don't mess around. Have you settled your wife? Have you settled your sister-in-law? You have settled those two. And Uncle Huang, Emingzu, is the eldest princess. It's difficult to settle the etiquette. Li Yi had never seen Li Xian so agitated. He couldn't even get a word in. Then he thought of something. He didn't have many opportunities to meet with the eldest princess, and he also had to be on guard against Li Xian at all times. What could he do to get past this hurdle and make him pay more attention in the future so that he wouldn't be so reckless? It seemed like there really was. So he held the eldest princess's hand and sighed. His face showed helplessness. You also know that Emingzu is the eldest princess. He looked at Li Xian. His expression was slightly gloomy. So, if we won't be together, it's as difficult as ascending to heaven, Li Xian hurriedly said. Don't be discouraged. You don't look like someone who gives up easily. Let's think of a way together. It should be possible. Li's tone was sad. So, we can only be together for such a short period of time when we were discussing politics. Although it was hard to lie to him like this, he didn't have any conscience. But it was better than letting him know the truth. A white lie was worth forgiving. The eldest princess also understood his intention at this moment. She quietly let him hold her hand. In Li Xian's view, this was a kind of floating and sinking according to the man. Otherwise, with Mingzhu's temper, she would only hold a man's hand. It was impossible for her to hold his hand. I know. It's not easy for you. I'll leave now. Li Xian nodded fiercely to show that he understood. He turned and walked outside without any hesitation. Forget it. I still have business today. Li grabbed his arm and pulled him back. He asked, You just said that the paper has been made? Li Xian looked at them again and then said, It has been dried. The quality is really high and the cost is so low. Once it's launched, the Academy's problem can be solved. But he thought of something else and asked doubtfully, Of the two types of paper you made this time, one is of high quality and low price. It will definitely be recognized by the world, but the other, it is very soft. After you use ink, it will immediately permeate. You can't write on it, you can't draw on it, and you can't use it to wrap things. Why did you waste so much effort to make this inferior paper? Li glanced at him and said, Why do you care why I made this paper? Since it has been made, it must be of great use. Otherwise, what is it used for? To wipe my ass? Li Xian looked at him disdainfully. Vulgar, let's not talk about this. Li looked at him and said, I've taught you the basic method of papermaking. Now you have a certain understanding of the principle of papermaking. You can use this knowledge to take a small step forward. How? Li Xian asked doubtfully. The paper for writing has been made. It shouldn't be difficult to make waterproof paper and fireproof paper. I'll give you 3 days. Is that enough? Li Xian's eyes widened. Waterproof paper and fireproof paper? Why? Is 3 days too short? Li Yi thought for a moment and said, Then 5 days. 5 days is enough. If it's longer, I may not want to eat paper-wrapped fish so much. Li Xian shook his head vigorously. As the saying goes, paper can't contain fire. This paper will also become useless in contact with water. How can you make the 2 kinds of paper you mentioned? Haven't I already taught you the basic method of papermaking? Besides, you're in the field of science. Don't say the word impossible so easily. Li Yi walked to the door of the hall and seemed to think of something. He turned around and said, By the way, about me and Eming, don't worry, I won't tell anyone. Li Xian said in a daze. Then he counted with his fingers and said loudly, Also, impossible is 3 words. Chapter 804. In the small courtyard of Willow Lane, Xiao Chui held her chin with one hand and stared straight at the door. She murmured, Miss, Lily hasn't been here for a long time. Zheng Zumo was spreading the osmanthus flowers she had just picked yesterday on the stone table to dry. After the osmanthus flowers were dried and ground into powder, they could be stored until this time next year. The fragrance filled the courtyard. She didn't answer. Xiao Chui's question. Instead, she moved the ones that had just been sun-dried to a place where the sun could shine. Miss, Xiao Chui stood up and trotted over. She asked, Miss, why aren't you in a hurry? What's the hurry? Zheng Zumo glanced at her and sat back down at the stone table. Why isn't Lily here yet? The servant girl only felt that her young miss was really, really silly. She anxiously said, Did you two quarrel? Otherwise, why hasn't young Masterly come here for so long? Young miss, at this time, you can't throw a tantrum. Young Masterly is such a good person. Okay. Zheng Zumo waved her hand and said, His wife is about to have a baby. He is taking care of it at home. Of course, he doesn't have time to come over. Don't think too much all day. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiao Chui nodded. Her heart finally relaxed. Zheng Zumo looked up at her and asked, What did you say about me just now? Petulant? Hee, I'm not. Xiao Chui ran over and shook her arm. Miss is the best. Wan Ruoqing, wearing an apron, came out of the kitchen and asked with a smile, Zumo, didn't you say you wanted to learn how to make osmanthus cakes for me? Come in. You. Zheng Zumo stood up and pointed her finger at Xiao Chui's forehead. Then, she turned around and walked quickly to the kitchen. Is it difficult to make osmanthus cakes? She was full of confidence before, but after walking into the kitchen, she was a little worried. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, It's not difficult to make, but it's not easy to make it delicious either. Osmanthus powder, noodles, water temperature, kneading time, steaming time, and the size of the fire will more or less affect the taste. Ah! Zheng Zumo's eyes widened, and her face revealed a dispirited expression. It's over. I can't do so many things. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, As long as it's you who did it, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. What are you talking about? Zheng Zumo blushed and said, I just want to learn and cook for myself in the future. All right. If you say it's for yourself, I'll make it for myself. Wan Ruoqing smiled and said, Although the process is a bit complicated, fortunately there is still a lot of time. After trying a few times, I will naturally be familiar with it. What do you mean I'm making it for myself? That's what I meant. Okay. I'll make it for you. But before that, I have a question to ask you. Why are you acting so mysterious? What's the problem? Say it. Does drunken MO like boys or girls? Zheng Zumo was startled and immediately blushed. Seeing the teasing look on Wan Ruoqing's face, how could she not know that what they said that day had been heard by her? She said angrily, Good, you dare to laugh at me. She reached out to tickle the other, and Wan Ruoqing dodged and fought back. After a while, the two women were flushed. Zheng Zumo panted slightly and said, No more. Let's get started. Wan Ruoqing nodded, and a smile appeared on her slightly haggard face. However, in this smile, there was a hidden trace of loneliness, desolation, and sourness. Zheng Zumo, who was full of joy and sweetness, did not notice it. The maids of the Li family had been very frightened in recent days. They were specially assigned by the old lady to take care of the young madam, but it had been half a month, and they could only do things like wiping the table and sweeping the floor. The Marquis's care for young madam could be said to be meticulous. He was so meticulous that they could not interfere at all. He was so meticulous that other than cooking personally, he even chased them away from things like combing hair and washing feet. What made them sad and even a little frustrated was that the hair that Master Ho combed for the young madam was much more beautiful than theirs. Even the maids who were the best at this could not compare. For a woman, wasn't the happiest thing in life to marry a husband who was willing to spoil her, love her, and take care of her in every possible way? Even if this husband did not have any great ability, it was enough to help each other for a lifetime. And Master Ho could no longer be described as great ability. He had great ability. The youngest duke of the Jing Kingdom, the youngest minister of Golden Zhuanglu, and the most favored official of His Majesty. The more capable Master Ho was, the more precious the things he did for the young madam were. Their marquis was far from being comparable to the group of coquettish, cheap, and powerful nobles outside. All right, husband, there's nothing else for me to do here. Husband, please go back to your work. Inside the room, Rui looked at Li Yi and said helplessly, "It's nothing." Li Yi shook his head and asked, "Are you hungry? Do you want me to peel an apple for you? The Wang family of Luo Chuan just sent it over this morning. It's better than the offerings sent to the palace." "Oh, you're not hungry? Then are you thirsty? The soup is almost ready. I'll go get you a bowl." "I'm not thirsty." "All right, then you rest first. I'll be in the courtyard. Call me if you need anything." Li Yi closed the door, walked into the courtyard, and sat opposite Mississippi Liu. Mississippi Liu was reading a newly published wuxia picture book. Li Yi asked casually, "Do you have enough money?" Mississippi Liu turned a page, and her eyes didn't move away from the picture book. She said, 100,000 taels is enough for a long time. My previous investment can be gradually recovered now, and I won't need so much in the future. After all, he was concerned about her. Her casual attitude was a bit too much. Li Yi frowned slightly, looked at her, and said, "Hey, Rui, when you speak, can you look at others? This is the most basic respect, right?" Mississippi Liu was stunned when she heard this, and then nodded. She closed the picture book, raised her head, and sat up straight. She looked into his eyes and said apologetically, "Okay." After receiving Mississippi Liu's apology, Li Yi nodded in satisfaction and asked, "Where were we just now?" "Oh, Lu Meng's investment has paid off." Mississippi Liu showed an expression of interest. She looked into his eyes to show respect and asked, "Speaking of your friend with the surname Li, has his matter been resolved?" "What are you talking about? Don't always talk about others behind their backs." Li Yi stood up and said, "There's something going on at the school. I'll go take a look. You stay at home and take good care of your sister." There was nothing going on at the school. As the vice dean and dean, Li Han would take care of all the matters at the school. However, he was still young, just over 11 years old. If the position of dean was really given to him, the old emperor and the court officials wouldn't feel at ease. Therefore, although he was now exercising the authority of the dean, he still had to wait for a few years to take over the position. There was a small grassy slope at the back of the school. In order to protect the lawn, neither students nor teachers were allowed to go up there. Of course, the dean was not included. At the back of the grassy slope, where they couldn't see, Li Yi and the eldest princess sat side by side. It was not an easy task to be in charge of the affairs of country. Even a martial arts master had limited energy. She looked a little tired and didn't speak. She just crossed her knees and lowered her head, listening to Li Yi. The Yu family should also know that the paper price they offered can't be higher. If it's higher, your people don't have to agree, or it will be too fake. There's also news from the paper mill. They really have started to stock up. Let's wait a little longer. The word live that I told you last time. He only said a few words before he felt a slight weight on his shoulder. He turned his head and saw the eldest princess leaning on his shoulder. She had actually fallen asleep. Li Yi stared blankly for a moment, then sighed softly. It seemed that she was really tired. Whether this kind of life was good or bad for her, he didn't know. He didn't move again and let her lean on him. He looked at the sparkling lake in the distance and thought about something else. At the bottom of the grassy slope, a figure walked up quietly without making sound. Li Xian crawled up the grassy slope and looked down. When he saw the figures snuggling up to each other, he nodded slightly and slowly climbed back down. Chapter 805. The Academy of Sciences really can't make waterproof and fireproof paper. Li Xian looked a little haggard. It was obvious that he had been thinking about this matter for the past few days. It seemed that he really had no clue. Otherwise, he wouldn't have given up so quickly. If you can't make it, then forget it. At most, I won't eat paper-wrapped fish anymore. Li shook his head and said, Mingzhu is very busy these days. Keep a close eye on the paper mill, especially the method of making paper. Don't leak it. Also help to take care of the people from the princess's residence. Li Xian nodded and said, Don't worry, I'm watching. Speaking of Ming, Li Xian turned to look at him and hesitated for a moment before saying, I know it's not easy for you, but Mingzhu is tired enough dealing with political affairs. You should control yourself and take care of your health. Li looked at him in surprise and asked, "What should we control?" "Anyway, just control yourself. Look at how tired she is." Watching Li Xian turn to leave, Li shook his head and murmured, "Strange," fearing that he would forget. He reminded him again, "Insist on visiting the Yu family." "Got it." Li Xian waved to the back and walked out of the gate. "The Yu mansion." A steward of the Yu mansion said to the middle-aged official sitting on the chair with a bitter smile, "Sir, it's really not that we don't want to help. It's just that the paper mill of the Yu family just received a few big orders before the new year. We really can't spare any extra people." The middle-aged official thought for a moment and said again, "If the Yu family is willing to provide this batch of paper to the academy first, the price could be increased by 1 liter. The steward looked embarrassed. He thought for a moment and said, "Sir, please wait for a moment. I'll go and inform the master first." Not long after, Ning Yuan Ho Dingfeng personally saw the official of the princess's residence out and said, "Sir, rest assured that what the princess is doing is good for the country and the people. The Yu family is also doing our part for the country. Thank you very much, Marquis. I will take my leave first. Farewell." Seeing the official leave, a strange smile appeared on Yu Dingfeng's face, and he walked back into the mansion. "Father, are we going to agree to the princess just like that?" A young man came from afar and followed him. He asked anxiously, "How are we going to explain this to the Chui family and the king of Shu?" "What do you know?" Yu Dingfeng glanced at him and said, "The demand for paper in the academy is so large that no one but the Yu family can afford it. Since they are offering such a high price, why don't we do it? If this large sum of money is used on this, I want to see how their academy will operate in the future. If their academy can't continue and we get the money for nothing, not only will noble consort Chui not blame us, but this matter will also be a great merit." The young man was startled for a moment before a look of reverence appeared on his face. "Father is wise." Yu Dingfeng waved his hand and said, "All right, stop flattering me. Tell me, what's the matter?" "Nothing can be hidden from father." The young man smiled embarrassedly and said, "Third brother has been reflecting on himself in his room for half a month. Mother sent me to ask when. Don't mention that bastard to me." Hearing him mention this matter, Yu Dingfeng's face was filled with rage. If it weren't for that blind bastard provoking that person from the Chun family, that madman Qin Chong wouldn't have come knocking on their residence to denounce them. The Yu family had paid a heavy price to settle this matter, and even now, he still felt his heart ache when he thought about it. "I said 1 month, so it's 1 month. Not a day less, not even an hour less," Yu Dingfeng said with a sullen face. He then asked, "Have you found the prostitute from that day?" The young man lowered his head and said, "Not yet. When I found the brothel, I heard that she redeemed herself on the same day and left. As for where she went, I don't know." Yu Dingfeng's face became even more sullen. Even now, if he still did not know that the Yu family had been schemed against, he would not be fit to be the head of the Yu family. Half a month ago, after listening to the bodyguard's detailed account of what had happened that day, he realized that the appearance of that woman and the words she had said were all meant to lead that unfilial son into a conflict with that person from the Qin family. That was why Chun Chong had come knocking on their door. It was clear that someone had schemed against the Yu family from behind. Although he did not know who the mastermind was, he had to settle this score with the Chun family sooner or later. Originally, after knowing the identity of the other woman in the cloth shop that day, he still had many misgivings. After all, the youngest golden Zhuanglu of all the dynasties was not a person who was easy to get along with. Fortunately, after so much time had passed, that person had not made any moves. Perhaps he had already forgotten about this matter. Yes, he must have forgotten about it. When Li Yi walked out of the School of Mathematics, Li Xian chased after him and asked after listening to him, "Has the Yu family agreed?" Li Xian nodded and said, "They just agreed. Should we release that paper now?" "No hurry." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Let them stock up more goods first." Originally, there was only a small grudge with the Yu family, but it had been half a month, and with the interest, the small grudge had long become a big one. Bullying Imingzu and Zhe Mo only made them lose money, which was not a big deal. After all, although the money was gone, At least the people were still there. When passing by a brothel, he asked Sue to stop the carriage. This brothel was the core of all the brothels in the capital. Usually, all the matters of the brothel would be gathered here. If her watching was not in Willow Lane, she would be here most of the time. County Marquis Lee, when walking into the brothel, a voice came from behind. Lee turned his head and looked at the middle-aged man who came in from outside. The middle-aged man in luxurious clothes took 2 steps forward, smiled, and said, "It's really County Marquis Lee." Lee's eyes swept over the man behind the middle-aged man. Then he looked at him in confusion and asked, "You are?" "I'm Chin He." The middle-aged man smiled and said, "Prime Minister Chin is my father." He made an obeisance with one hand in the other before his chest. "So it's Lord Chin. You flatter me." The middle-aged man said with a smile, "I'm the 5th child in the family, and I have no official position. I'm just an ordinary man." "County Marquis Lee, you also come to the brothel to watch the show?" "I'm just watching." Lee smiled and asked casually, "I wonder what show Lord Chin is watching this time." "The Orphan of Zhao." Lord Chin smiled and said, "This show is really good. I don't know who wrote it. It's the 3rd time I've watched it." Lee said in surprise. It turns out that Lord Chin likes to watch this kind of show of enduring revenge. Lord Chin shook his head with a smile and said, "I'm just watching, just watching." Lee chatted with this 5th master of the Chin clan for a while before the latter entered a railing. Lee stood outside for a moment before withdrawing his gaze and walking towards the small building inside with familiarity. Inside the small building, there were several women busy. Seeing Lee come in, they hurriedly got up and saluted. "Young master, are you looking for Miss Watching? She's upstairs." Lee nodded to them with a smile, walked up the stairs, and gently knocked on the door of a room. "Come in." When Lee pushed the door open and entered, Wan Watching was writing something at the desk. Without raising her head, she said softly, "Recently, there have been 2 new shows, and the repertoire needs to be rearranged. The costumes should be ready soon, and I'll go and urge them tomorrow. The 2 brothels in the east of the city are a little understaffed and need to be transferred." "Ah, you're here." There was no sound coming from the door. She raised her head and glanced at it. After a moment of surprise, she immediately stood up. Lee walked over slowly and said, "You don't have to personally arrange these trivial matters. The people below can also do it." Wan Watching smiled and said, "I have nothing to do, so I'll just do what I can." "How many times have you said it, but you've never listened?" Lee looked at her, shook his head, and said helplessly. When talking to her, she had always been so gentle and soft. She was truly a woman as gentle as water. No matter how impetuous he was, he could quickly calm down after spending a short time with her. When he passed by here, he came to see her and talked about some things about the brothels. He didn't know how many times he had told her to rest more and not to be too tired. Then, he refused her offer to send him downstairs and left. Above the small building, a gentle gaze, through the window, watched him walk out of the brothel and stopped at the place where his figure disappeared. The figure leaned against the window and stared blankly until the sky darkened. Chapter 806. In the hibiscus garden, the warm sunlight shone on the square in front of the palace. Jing Emperor was basking in the sun while rocking his chair comfortably. He smiled as he looked at the children who were playing and running in front of him. It was not until he was tired that he yawned and asked, "How's the matter at the academy?" Standing in the sun like a pole, motionless for half an hour, the figure finally moved and said, "Although His Highness is busy with government affairs every day, he has never neglected the matter of the academy. Now the academy in the capital has already started construction. The 5 states near the capital have also begun the construction of their respective academies. However, His Highness seems to have encountered trouble in another matter." Changde said a few words, and Jing Emperor frowned slightly. "The Yu family?" Changde nodded and said, "I am afraid that the Chui family is behind the Yu family. After all, if the academy is really implemented in the long run, it will shake the foundation of the aristocratic families. The imperial court's paper shops are distributed to various yamens. They can't take out too much to give to the academy. The Yu family is indeed a problem. Jing Emperor thought for a moment and asked, how did Mingzu deal with it? His Highness sends people to discuss with the Yu family every day. It seems that they have just reached an agreement, but the price is a bit too high. Jing Emperor looked puzzled and murmured, this is not like Mingzhu's style of doing things, and it is not like that boy. What is Li Yi doing recently? His wife is about to give birth. These days, he has been attending to her. What a good-for-nothing guy. Jing Emperor waved his hand and said, the scenery in the hibiscus garden is pleasant, and the weather is good today. Go and call the three of them over. I haven't seen them for a long time. The arrogant Lolita, who was approaching from behind, immediately gave up the idea of scaring her father. She hurriedly ran over and asked, Father, is teacher coming over? Jing Emperor nodded and said, Father is busy today. Shanning just said that she wants to go out to play. Just bring more guards. Remember not to make trouble. When did she say that she wanted to go out? After getting a positive answer, the arrogant Lolita said in a sweet voice and immediately ran back. Emperor Jing asked in confusion, where are you going? I didn't even wash up this morning, so of course I have to dress up and change my clothes. By the time her voice could be heard, she had already disappeared into the back of the hall. When did this child become so vain? Emperor Jing said doubtfully. He waved his hand and said, ask the catering company to prepare today's banquet. Just as Li Yi was about to leave, a eunuch came to his door and said that His Majesty had summoned him to Furong Garden. After finding out the cause of the matter, he learned that the eldest princess and Li Xian had also been summoned, so he didn't think too much about it. In any case, he also planned to enter the palace to discuss matters with the eldest princess, so going to Furong Garden was a bit closer. The net had already been cast. After all these days, the fish had already entered the net. It was time to reel in the net. You of all the surnames, it had to be this one. The family was unfortunate. The family was unfortunate. When he went out, Fong ran over from distance and said, Son-in-law, where are you going? I've finished the things you gave me a few days ago. Li was surprised and said, so fast. Fong nodded and said, next time, you can leave these small things to others. These days, I didn't even have time to take care of the shops in the city. All right, get in the car. Li waved his hand. These days, without Fong, it was much quieter. However, he couldn't let him keep doing those unimportant chores. He only hoped that he could sum up the experience and learn from it. When he arrived at Furong Garden, Li Xian and the eldest princess had not arrived yet. Seeing that rocking chair, Li felt a little distressed. The ruler of a country came to snatch a rocking chair in broad daylight, and didn't even get a tael of silver as compensation. Was there still law in this world? The old emperor lay on the rocking chair and asked directly, what are you going to do about the academy? What about the academy? Li was surprised and said, isn't it always the eldest princess who deals with the academy? I don't know. Emperor Jing glanced at him and said, all right, Mingzu is a straightforward person. How could she think of such a sinister idea? Don't think that I don't know that it's all your ideas. Last time in the Imperial Garden, I heard everything. I'm sorry, I forgot. Li smiled awkwardly and then said doubtfully, Your Majesty, you were just talking about the academy. The academy has been doing well recently. Nothing has happened. Emperor Jing frowned and said, then the Yu family. Li looked puzzled and asked, which Yu family? Ning Yu and Ho. Emperor Jing had just opened his mouth when he saw Li Yi's expression. He was startled and seemed to understand something. He nodded and said, the Yu family has made contributions to the country in the past. Don't kill them. Li shook his head and explained, Your Majesty, you misunderstood me. I didn't intend to kill them, Father. The eldest princess came from behind and bowed to Emperor Jing. I'll take my leave first. It was better for an outsider like him not to know about the discussion between Her Majesty and the retired emperor. Li sensibly retreated. He still had to eat here later, so he couldn't leave for the time being. Fortunately, the scenery in Hibiscus Garden was good. He planned to go to the lake to enjoy the scenery. After a few steps, he stopped and stared blankly in front of him. Not far away from the intersection, A proud Lolita, wearing a white palace dress, stood there charmingly. Li was slightly surprised. The proud Lolita usually liked to wear brightly colored clothes and wore her hair in a double spiral bun. The flying fairy bun was the favorite hairstyle of young girls. Today, she wore a white palace dress, and her hair was combed back into a heart bun. At first glance, she didn't look like a crazy girl at all. At this moment, Li truly felt that the 14-year-old Princess Shining was no longer the proud Lolita from before. "Sir," she stood there with her hands clasped together and said something in a low voice. Li came back to his senses and walked over. He asked, "Where's Yongning? Why isn't she with you?" She lowered her head and said with a red face, "Yongning has to go to class today. I'm not feeling well, so I asked for leave." "You're not feeling well?" Li looked down at her and asked with concern, "What's wrong? Have you seen the imperial physician?" The proud Lolita lowered her head and looked at her toes. She whispered, "I feel uncomfortable for a few days every month." "There's no need to see the imperial physician." He didn't know how to respond to this question. The little Lolita had really grown up. In the past, she liked to hold his hand when she walked and would often cling to him like an octopus. Now that they were walking side by the lake, she wasn't as noisy as she used to be. She became exceptionally quiet, which made Li feel a little uncomfortable. Sitting on the lawn by the lake, the proud Lolita softly talked about some interesting things that happened to her in the academy. For example, no matter what kind of chess they played, she had no match in the academy. Another time, when a mathematics teacher punished her friend, she asked Li Han to come up with a few questions to ask the mathematics teacher. In the end, the female teacher didn't come to class for 3 days. Li Xian and the eldest princess walked over from afar. Li Xian looked at the two of them and squatted down. He said, "Bing Ning, come with Brother Xian. Brother Xian will give you something fun to play with. Brother Xian, I've grown up. I don't play with those things anymore." Although the proud Lolita was unwilling, she was still dragged away by Li Xian. Li lay comfortably on the grassy slope. Below him was a small lake. The lake water was dark green. The wind blew from the surface of the lake, bringing a refreshing coolness. This kind of weather was actually very suitable for barbecues or picnics. It was a pity that the old emperor had already arranged a banquet. Mingzu sat beside him. She bent her legs and looked at the lake. She seemed to be thinking about something, and her gaze was slightly absent-minded. Li Xian walked over from afar and said, "I'm afraid that the two of you will attract suspicion if you're alone. It'll be better if I'm here." He took out 2 pieces of dough from his sleeves and stuffed them into his ears. He looked at Li and said, "Don't worry, I can't see or hear anything. You guys can continue chatting." After he finished speaking, he walked to a place 10 feet away from the two of them and lay down on the ground. At the same time, in a palace somewhere in the courtyard, a girl in a white dress lay on the bed. She crossed her legs and swayed unconsciously. She flipped through the pages of a book and muttered, "The book says that girls should be reserved, but teacher doesn't seem to like it." Chapter 807. Being an emperor was actually very difficult, and being a diligent emperor was even more difficult. The old emperor was very diligent in political affairs, so his health was deteriorating day by day. Her Highness was a rare young expert in the world, but she had only experienced the Empress mode for a short period of time, and she was already so tired. There were many reasons for this. It was the first time she held such power in her hands, and she was not used to it. She did not know how to use it. First, some people in the court deliberately made things difficult for her. Second, they submitted all the big and small matters to her. Third, they encountered problems that they could not solve, so they submitted them all. With her serious personality, she could not pretend that she did not see it. In the long run, even an Iron Man would not be able to withstand it. He lay on the grass, his hands behind his head, and adjusted to a comfortable position. He said, "This can't go on." Mingzu tilted her head slightly and looked at him. "You have to build your own team. There are many things that you do not need to deal with personally. The burden of a country is all on you. Even 10 of you, 100 of you, would not be able to handle it. Mingzu looked at him and said, "It's not that I have not thought about this, but the relationships between the 3 provinces and 6 ministries are complicated. What kind of people should I choose? Of course, you need to know everything." Li thought for a moment and said, "The capital governor, Dong Wenyan, Magistrate Dong's character and ability. You should be able to trust him, right?" Mingzu nodded and said, "Magistrate Dong was personally promoted by my father. He is an honest and upright official with outstanding achievements. He has his own unique views on court affairs, and his character and ability are naturally trustworthy." Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Appointments, Li Mingzi, what do you think? Mingzi looked at him in surprise and asked, "Isn't Li Mingzi your second uncle? External promotion does not avoid enemies. Internal promotion does not avoid relatives. Have you heard of this saying?" He looked at her and said righteously, "Although he is my second uncle, his work as an official is commendable and can be of great use. What do you think?" "That's true." Mingzi nodded and said, "If that's the case, then Assistant Minister of Revenue, Sang Shichen's ability has always been outstanding. If there are no accidents, it is very likely that he will take over the position of Minister of Revenue in the future. How about?" He straightened his body and sat up. "The Ministry of Revenue's Qin Darren is still here. Why did you find an assistant minister?" Mingzu Li explained, "Master Qin is in charge of the entire Ministry of Revenue. He can't leave easily, so he can only choose from the people below him. Isn't there another assistant minister?" "You have a grudge against assistant ministers. What enmity could there be between us?" "Sang Shichen. His character is questionable. Let's choose another assistant minister." Li pursed his lips and said, "Besides, we don't avoid enemies and relatives. Even if we do have any enmity, it won't affect this matter." As an outsider, he ran to Willow Alley all day. Sometimes, before it was time for the yamen to open, he would still be there. This kind of person who came to work early and left early, had no organization or discipline, and only wanted to muddle along. Could he take on a big responsibility? The other assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue hasn't made any contributions in many years. Mingzu Li nodded and said, "Then I will consider the candidate for the Ministry of Revenue." Li thought about it and said, "Also, what do you think about the Wang family of Luochuan?" Let me interrupt. Li Xian, who was lying on the other side of the grass, rolled over and said, "The Wang family has always been loyal to the emperor and patriotism. Naturally, they are trustworthy." Saying this, he turned over again. "I'm done. You can continue." Needless to say, the Wang family. In addition, one person must be selected from each of the 6 ministries. The Hall of Governmental Affairs, the school. These places also need to select some people. Based on the principle of not avoiding enemies and relatives, the 2 of them excluded all the officials of the King of Shu. The selected officials were either outstanding or had relations with the princess's mansion and were trustworthy. After going through these names in his mind, Li said, "As for the Ministry of Penalty, there won't be any problem if Lu Yi takes care of it. By the way, the magistrate of the capital city, Lu Dayo, is also a rare talent." Mingzi Li nodded and said, "Indeed, Magistrate Lu is very meticulous. The affairs of the academy are complicated, and ordinary people can't handle it. If I hand it over to him, there shouldn't be any mistakes." Achoo! The magistrate of the capital city, Lu Dayo, turned his back and sneezed. Then he turned his head and rubbed his nose. He picked up the chopsticks again and said to Mrs. Lu, "Boil some ginger soup for me later. I was busy until midnight yesterday. I'm afraid I caught a cold." Madame Lu glanced at him and said in a resentful tone, "So you still know to work until midnight?" Magistrate Lu coughed twice, which meant that the child was still there and they shouldn't talk about these things. When he was about to pick up some food, he noticed that his daughter, who was sitting across from him, was looking at him, then at her mother, then at her older brother. Finally, she took out the small mirror that she had spent dozens of taels of silver to buy from her bosom and looked at herself for a while, muttering something to herself. Magistrate Lu frowned and knocked on the table, asking, What are you muttering to yourself instead of eating? After coming to the capital city, he was particularly strict with his children. Fortunately, both of them didn't let him down. His son had excellent grades in the arithmetic college, and his daughter was also one of the best in the women's college. Therefore, his tone of reprimand at this moment was not very strict. The girl said with a smile, "Hee, both father and mother have single eyelids. My brother and I also have single eyelids. We were both born by our parents." Magistrate Liu was stunned and said with a sullen face, "What single eyelids and double eyelids? What nonsense are you talking about? How can you and my brother not be born by our parents?" It was said in the science class. The girl said with some pride. Young Mr. Chin said that if both parents have single eyelids, their children will also have single eyelids. If both parents can't distinguish between red and green, their children can't distinguish between red and green. Nonsense. Magistrate Liu ate a mouthful of rice and said, "Prince Chung and Princess Chung can't distinguish between red and green, but the little commandery princess can also distinguish between red and green." The reason why he was so clear about this matter was that a scandal happened in Prince Cheng's mansion 2 days ago, which was discussed in the capital city. For some unknown reason, Chung Wang, who had always been known for his honesty, actually acted against Chung Wang Fei in his foo and even chased her back to her paternal home. He had also heard some rumors that said that Chung Wang's daughter wasn't his own. The little commandery princess dropped out of school 2 days ago. The girl looked at him, stuck out her tongue, and said in a small voice, "I don't know why she suddenly dropped out. I have one less person to talk to in the college." Magistrate Liu was stunned for a moment, then waved his hand and said, "Even if it's not distinguishing between red and green, it's really like this. What does single eyelids and double eyelids have to do with whether or not they're biological? It's just nonsense. If you don't believe me, I'll give you an example then." At a certain point, Magistrate Liu's body suddenly shook and his voice stopped abruptly. "No." The girl shook her head and said, "Young Mr. Chin said that if the parents have double eyelids, the children may have single eyelids. If the parents have single eyelids, the children can't have double eyelids, unless... Magistrate Liu's face was pale and his body trembled. The bowl in his hand fell to the ground and broke into pieces, but he didn't care about it at all. He slumped on the chair and murmured, "Impossible! This is impossible! Master, what's wrong with you?" Seeing this scene, Mrs. Liu was so scared that her face turned pale. She hurriedly stood up and said loudly, Hurry, go find a doctor. I'm afraid the master has a stroke." Magistrate Liu climbed up from the chair, looked at his daughter, and asked, "Do all the students in your women's college know about this?" "No, they are all unwilling to take the science course. Only a few of us." The girl said with some regret. Young Mr. Chin said that this was all said by Mark Healy. "It's not written in the book. No one wants to listen, so she won't teach it in the future." Magistrate Liu had already sat back in the chair. His face was a little better than before, but he still couldn't help murmuring, "This is impossible. This is impossible." Chapter 808. A good meal turned out like this. The young girl felt uneasy. She timidly walked over and whispered, Father, what's wrong?" Oh, nothing." County Magistrate Liu calmed down. He waved his hand and said, "Nothing. Don't spread rumors about Prince Cheng's little princess. Single eyelid, double eyelid. Don't mention it again." The young girl nodded obediently. I know. Everything that happened just now seemed to have been brushed aside so easily. You guys eat. I have something to do and have to go out." County Magistrate Liu stood up and walked out after saying that. When he walked to the door, he stopped and asked, "Oh, you just said that these things were taught by County Mark Healy. Which County Mark Healy?" "Which County Mark Healy?" "The one my father always talks about." "Okay, I got it." County Magistrate Liu waved his hand and said, "You guys eat first. I'm leaving." He quickly walked out of the door. When he crossed the threshold, he tripped and almost fell. "Young master, what's the difference between the food rewarded by the emperor and the food outside?" In the carriage, Fong looked inside and asked curiously. Li leaned against the carriage and said lightly, "You want to know? How about taking you with us next time?" "That's too embarrassing." Fong rubbed his hands and asked, "When is the next time?" Li waved his hand. "Nothing special. The skills of the imperial chefs in the palace are almost the same as your wife's." Fong curled his lips and said, "Young master, don't lie to me. The imperial chefs are the best chefs in the world. How can they be a chef in the palace if they don't have skills?" Li glanced at him. "Why do you think the little princess and the emperor always like to eat at our house?" Old Fong froze for a moment, then immediately lost interest in the emperor's food. He turned his head and suddenly asked, "Young master, we're almost at Willow Lane. Do you want to go in and sit for a while?" "Since you're here, sit for a while." Li nodded and got off the carriage. Watching him walk in the alley, Fong comfortably leaned against the carriage. He let out a long sigh and said, "I'm so tired these days." It's better to follow the son-in-law, the sloppy old man, who had been sitting at the side with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and asked indifferently, "Do you know why your son-in-law didn't let you follow him these days?" Fong glanced at him and said, "Because the son-in-law has other, more important things for me to do. Because you talk too much." After the sloppy old man finished speaking, he closed his eyes again. "You are jealous." Fong glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and ignored him. He was really exhausted from the past few days. While his son-in-law was being affectionate inside, he should take a rest first. Not long after he closed his eyes, he heard footsteps coming from the front. Fong opened his eyes and asked in surprise, "Young master, why are you back?" "There's only Xiao Chui at home." Li got on the carriage and said, "Let's go back." Fong waved his whip and started the carriage. He turned around and asked curiously, "Young master, I have a question." Okay. "If you're really curious about what the emperor usually eats, I'll bring some back for you next time." "Not this." Fong shook his head and asked curiously, Missing doesn't need to say anything." "Miss Wan, young master, what do you plan to do?" The sloppy old man, who was resting with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. After glancing at him, he slowly closed them again. The carriage was silent for a long time before a voice came out. "Fong, recently, Lu Meng's side is a bit short on manpower." The carriage stopped in front of the new residence. Fong jumped off and said, "Young master, I'll go back and pack up. I'll stay in the league for a few days." "Forget it, Lu Meng, don't go. You'd better stay with me." Li waved his hand and said, "I didn't eat much at Hibiscus Garden. Go ask the kitchen to cook a few dishes and take out the jar of wine you've been hiding." "Young master, where am I?" "Go quickly." Although he did not know why the son-in-law asked him to go to the Lu Meng to help and change his mind so quickly, to him, these two things were very interesting. There was no difference. However, he felt sorry for the jar of wine. It was really good wine. It was more mellow than the strong wine made in his workshop, but it was less chewy. He only hoped that the son-in-law could leave a few mouthfuls for him. However, thinking of the young master's tolerance for alcohol, he immediately felt relieved. When the young master moved to the city, he naturally bought a house nearby. He went home and found a jar of wine under the bed. When he brought it back, he saw someone pacing back and forth at the entrance of the residence. After taking a look, he strode over and patted him on the shoulder. He smiled and said, "Hey, old Lu, you're here to see my young master?" County Magistrate Lu was already preoccupied. When he was suddenly patted on the shoulder, he was almost scared out of his wits. When he saw the person who came, he patted his chest and said, "Brother Fong, is Sir Li home?" "Yes, I just came back." It was not easy to meet an acquaintance from the Qing and government in the capital. Fong put his arm around his shoulder and said, "Come, let's go in together." "Brother Fong, please let me know. What's there to tell? We're all on the same side. No need to be so polite. Sir Lu came at the right time." Li pointed to the table and said, "Sit." "Fong, go get another pair of chopsticks for Sir Lu." County Magistrate Lu hurriedly waved his hand. "Sir Li, no need. I've already eaten at home. If I tell you to sit, then sit. Stop talking nonsense." Fong pushed him into his seat and quickly brought 2 pairs of chopsticks from the kitchen. He also sat to the side. Sir Liu, you've been busy with political affairs recently. It's really hard for you. You're welcome, sir. This is my duty. After the two chatted casually for a while, the dishes and wine were all served. Seeing County Magistrate Liu's pale face and absent-minded appearance, Li wondered, Sir Liu, you came here today because something happened in the academy? Is there someone in the court who dares to stop you on the matter of the academy? No. County Magistrate Liu hurriedly shook his head and said, I came here this time because I have something to ask you, sir. At this moment, Li was a little curious. He poured a cup of wine and said, Sir Liu, please say it. County Magistrate Liu thought for a while and said again after a moment, Sir Li, I have a friend. Huffed. This excuse was really old-fashioned. How stupid would one be to use it? Li almost spat out the wine in his mouth. If he hadn't turned his head quickly, he would be the only one who could eat this table of dishes and wine today. County Magistrate Liu was stunned and asked, Sir Li, what's wrong with you? Cough. Nothing, I'm fine. Sir Liu, what's wrong with your friend? Go on. Li wiped his mouth and said while waving his hand. County Magistrate Liu nodded and said, I have a friend. He and his wife both have single eyelids, but their child has double eyelids. Li put down the wine cup that he had raised and stared at County Magistrate Liu blankly. To be exact, he stared at County Magistrate Liu's eyelids. Well, single eyelids. Are you sure, Sir Liu? Sir Liu's friend and his wife have single eyelids, but their child has double eyelids. Is it because of a wrinkle or something? County Magistrate Liu shook his head and said, It shouldn't be. What should it not be? Is it true or not? County Magistrate Liu thought for a while and nodded. It can't be wrong. Li suddenly smiled and pushed a plate of vegetables in front of him, saying, Come. This matter is not urgent. Lord Liu, eat more vegetables. It's almost winter, and there aren't many vegetables outside. Lord Liu, when you go home, you can bring some more. Chapter 809. I've already eaten at home. County Magistrate Liu looked at the plate of green vegetables in front of him and was startled. He said, Lord Li, I just want to ask. I suddenly had an inspiration and came up with a poem. Why don't you help me analyze it? County Magistrate Liu was startled again. He cupped his hands and said, Lord Li is the #1 scholar in the imperial court with unparalleled talent in poetry. I'm not talented, and I don't dare. He waved his hand and said, It's just an exchange. Lord Liu, you don't have to belittle yourself. It's nothing. County Magistrate Liu cupped his hands again and said, I'm all ears. Li smiled and said, I've traveled to some places in my early years. I've been to a place called Chili Chuan at the foot of the Yin Mountain. Yin Mountain? County Magistrate Liu was puzzled. Lord Li, you've been to the north? Li nodded and said, Chili Chuan is a good place. Seeing this plate of green vegetables, I suddenly thought of the boundless green grassland there. I couldn't help but feel a bit poetic. County Magistrate Liu, why don't you listen to it? Li had a thoughtful expression on his face. After a while, he said, Chili Chuan at the foot of the Yin Mountain. The sky is like a dome, covering the surrounding wilderness. Thousands of miles of Yin Mountain, Chili Chuan Plain, the sky is vast and boundless, covering the surrounding wilderness. County Magistrate Liu nodded and said, Lord Li, you really have a wide range of knowledge. This poem has a broad realm and a majestic tone. It has the feeling of a northern folk song during the northern and southern dynasties. The sky is vast and the wilderness is boundless. These 2 lines describe the magnificence of the picture and the vastness of the wilderness. I live next door. My surname is Wang. County Magistrate Liu was startled and said with some uncertainty, The sky is vast and the wilderness is boundless. I live next door. My surname is Wang. The first line had been talking about the vastness of the world. This line changed too quickly. The strong contrast made him unable to believe his ears for a moment. Why? Lord Liu, you don't like this line? Li thought for a moment, then said, Then let's change it. The sky is vast, the field is boundless. a branch of red apricot wants to grow out of the wall. What does Lord Liu think of this sentence? Lord Li, I'm not as talented as you. County Magistrate Liu shook his head in shame and said, I just want to ask Lord Li. It was such an obvious hint, yet he couldn't understand it. It seemed like he had no choice but to make it clear. Li Yi sighed, walked over and said, no matter what, the child is innocent. I can't help much in this matter. Lord Liu, please reconsider. County Magistrate Liu was stunned for a moment before he asked, are you saying that if both parents have single eyelids, they really can't give birth to a child with double eyelids? Not necessarily. Li Yi thought about it and said, double eyelids and single eyelids are determined by genetics. Logically speaking, it's impossible for parents with single eyelids to give birth to a child with double eyelids. But nothing is absolute. Who knows? Maybe the child's Mercury and Halley's Comet will go in the opposite direction. If we don't save it, we won't change our fate. Fortunately, after practicing martial arts, he had deliberately exercised his body, and even his lung capacity had increased a lot. He didn't even gasp for breath when he said so many words. He took a sip of tea to moisten his throat. Then he looked at County Magistrate Liu and asked, Lord Liu, do you understand? Mercury, Comet, Halley dyed body? County Magistrate Liu looked at Li Yi in a daze. Then he nodded and said, I understand. Understand? Li Yi looked at him in surprise and said, since you understand, Lord Liu, tell me about it. County Magistrate Liu coughed dryly and said, Lord Li, you mean that parents with single eyelids are also very likely to give birth to a child with double eyelids? Under normal circumstances, what was the probability of the gene mutation that controlled eyelids? It was 1 in a million or less. Li Yi didn't know, but the other possibility was much higher. Li nodded and said, it's quite high. Jing Kingdom, Qi Kingdom, and maybe Zhao Kingdom. There should be 2 or 3. Jing Kingdom, Qi Kingdom, Zhao Kingdom. County Magistrate Liu was stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. Looking at his absent-minded look, Li Yi sighed and said, Lord Liu, life is unpredictable. Be strong. After a long time, County Magistrate Liu woke up from his absent-mindedness. He cupped his hands to Li Yi and said, Lord Li, I'll take my leave now. Seeing him stumble out, Li Yi glanced at Fong and said, go send Lord Liu back. Fong was holding the plate of green vegetables and eating. Hearing this, he raised his head and said, he's a grown-up. He doesn't need me to send him back. Don't you think so, old Liu? County Magistrate Liu stepped over the threshold. His body swayed, and he turned his head and said, Fong, brother Fong, you'd better send me back. When Li followed him out, a servant reported that a minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights wanted to see him. An official walked in quickly and bowed, saying, Lord Li, Imperial Concubine Li's birthday is coming. I'm here to send an invitation. The rules of the royal family were strict. The birthday of imperial concubines in the harem also had a corresponding etiquette process. Imperial concubine Shui's position in the palace was second only to the empress, so her birthday was naturally held every year. Of course, it didn't require all the officials to participate. According to the rules of previous years, Imperial concubine Shui would be allowed to go out of the palace to spend half a day with her relatives on the day of the birthday, and then return to the palace in the middle of the night. This banquet was actually hosted by the Shui family. Although Li Yi and the Shui family had never been on good terms, with his current status, the Shui family would still routinely send him an invitation to all the officials, even if there was any hatred. When the official from the Ministry of Rights saw Liu Daiyou, he was startled and immediately said, Lord Liu is also here. It saves me the trouble of making another trip. He rummaged for a while, took out another invitation, and handed it to County Magistrate Liu. Although the position of this capital magistrate was small, the power he held now was not small and couldn't be ignored. After the official from the Ministry of Rights left, seeing County Magistrate Liu staring blankly at the invitation in his hand, Li Yi casually asked, Lord Liu is also going to Imperial Concubine Shui's birthday. I was invited last year, and went once. County Magistrate Lu nodded and said, "It's not good for me to refuse such a thing." His eyes flickered. "I'm afraid I have to go again this year." Li nodded and said, "I won't go to Imperial Concubine Shui's birthday, but I still have to send the gift. Do you think if I send 50 eggs, isn't it a bit too much?" The Shui family had just been cheated of millions of taels of silver. It hadn't been a long time. How could they have spare money to hold a big birthday banquet for Imperial Concubine Shui? If the gift was too much, they couldn't take it back. "Well, we've arrived at the yamen. Old Lu, you can go in by yourself." The carriage stopped at the gate of the yamen. Fong jumped off the carriage and waved his hand. "I still have to go to the Jade's courtyard to discuss a big business, so I won't go in." He shook his head with some doubts. Before he left, the son-in-law specifically told him to keep an eye on County Magistrate Lu and not to let him do anything stupid. As a man and a county magistrate, how could he do something stupid in a quiet courtyard at the back of the county yamen? County Magistrate Lu was lying on a recliner, holding the invitation in his hand and staring at something in a daze. It was a small garden. Madam liked red daffodils, second mother liked yellow chrysanthemums, and there was a nameless blue flower next to it, which was transplanted by his daughter a few days ago. However, at this moment, all he saw was darkness, because the sky was falling. Chapter 8:10. I'm not very familiar with some of the people here, but since you've chosen them, they shouldn't be too far off. Li put down the list in his hand and said, "That's it. Let's settle it for the time being. After a while, we'll have another assessment." The eldest princess nodded. She thought of something and said, "Today is Imperial Concubine Shui's birthday. Although you don't get along well with the Shui family, according to etiquette, you should also send a gift. Otherwise, I'm afraid it will attract criticism." The old madam had already warned him about this matter 2 days ago. According to etiquette, with Imperial Concubine Shui's rank, there were only a few people in the harem who were higher than her. After all, she was an imperial concubine. Since the Shui family had sent an invitation, even if he didn't intend to go in person, he had to prepare a gift to not appear disrespectful. Nowadays, he carried too many titles and wasn't as carefree as before. There were some things that he still had to pay attention to. Then send a few boxes of fresh vegetables. They're green and not commonly seen in this season. In the future, it would be very inappropriate to give such a gift, not to mention that it was given to an imperial consort. However, it was different here. In the current season, a handful of fresh vegetables could not be bought with money. In the past, when the old emperor bestowed the important officials, which of the vegetables were not wilted? They were definitely not as green as the ones he gave himself. That's fine. Although this gift isn't heavy, it's just a token of appreciation. Eminga nodded and said, "A few years ago, the Shui family failed to win over Prime Minister Shun. The Shun family only sent an ordinary painting. Those important officials in the court who were unwilling to take sides were probably the same. Let's leave this matter as it is. Recently, there hasn't been any major events in the court. After this matter, you should rest for a while." Li warned her, got up and said, "I'll go back first. I'm boiling soup at home. It should be almost done." He didn't know if it was because she was about to give birth in 2 months, but Rui had recently lost her appetite. He had developed several new kinds of soup, which were nourishing and had the effect of stimulating the appetite. Mingzu walked him to the door of the hall and suddenly asked, "Why don't you bring soup when you come here recently?" "Forget it. It doesn't seem to have any effect. I won't wear it in the future." Li shook his head and sighed. "Next time you come, bring some more. I quite like the soup." Her body stiffened slightly as she spoke in a calm tone. Then, she turned around and walked back into the bedroom. In front of the bed, the eldest princess, the first person in the Jing kingdom to personally lead the state affairs and supervise the country on behalf of the emperor, took off her coat and loosened her corset a little, since a few days ago, if the girdle was as tight as it used to be, he would find it hard to breathe. Every August, there would be 2 grand events in the capital. One of them was the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival on August 15th. It was a carnival for all the people in the capital. There was no curfew on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival. The whole capital was decorated with lanterns and streamers. The brothels, wine shops, and brothels were also open all night. It was very lively. Although noble consort Chui's birthday could not be compared with the Mid-Autumn Festival, the curfew was only delayed for 2 hours for the convenience of the guests. However, on August 23rd, the carriages and sedans lined up in front of the Chui family's house occupied at least 2 streets. The night had just fallen. 2 people were walking on the crowded street. One of them looked ahead and said in surprise, "Your Excellency, during noble consort Chui's birthday last year, the carriages and sedans of the guests were all lined up here, right?" County Magistrate Lu nodded and said, "I remember that there was a whole street less this year than last year." Detective Zhao thought for a moment and said, "No wonder. At this time last year, the king of Shu was still in the capital. Many officials naturally had to give face to the king of Shu." County Magistrate Lu did not continue, but he knew in his heart that even if the king of Shu was still in the capital today, the scene in front of the Chui family's house would not be much better than now. That was because some of the owners of the carriages that had been parked here last year had died. Some had been imprisoned, some had their properties confiscated, and some had been exiled. Some felt that there was no need for them to come here this year or in the future. Detective Zhao did not continue this topic, but asked again, "Your Excellency, are you still going to put down the gifts and go in for a while this year?" County Magistrate Lu shook his head and said, "You wait outside for a while tonight. You have sent such a generous gift, you have to eat some of it back." At this time, there were not many guests in front of the Chui family's house. County Magistrate Lu walked over and handed over the gift list. A servant of the Chui family looked through it and immediately bowed and said, "Your Excellency, please," in a side hall of the Chui family's house. Chui Qingze, the master of the Chui family, was holding a thin book in his hand with a slightly gloomy face. "Is that all?" The servant of the Chui family beside him said in fear, "That's all." Behind him, a middle-aged man had already stood up, and his face was extremely gloomy. "All." The number of people coming to the house this year is not even half of last year's. Do they really think that the Chui family will collapse when Her Highness goes to Shuzhou? Another voice came from behind. Could it be that it's not the right time yet, and many people are on the way? However, this voice was very low, as if even the owner of the voice knew that he did not have any confidence in saying this. Too many things have happened in the past year. Chui Qingze put down the book in his hand, took a deep breath, and said, "Don't mention this again. Her Highness will be here soon. Get ready." The Chui family's house today was not as lively as in previous years. The mansion was still crowded. Although the king of Shu's party was temporarily depressed, there was still a force that could not be ignored in the court. Some important guests would naturally not be with the majority of the people. In another quiet hall, the environment was much quieter than the other places in the mansion. His Majesty values filial piety very much. This time, for Her Highness's birthday, he did not allow Her Highness to return to the capital. The memorial jointly submitted by the Ministry of Rights was rejected as soon as it was submitted. Now he wants the eldest princess to govern the country. What do you think His Majesty is thinking? There were only a few people in the hall. At this time, the one who spoke was the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights. It seems that what Her Highness did last time really touched His Majesty's reverse scale. "Sigh, I don't know who gave Her Highness the idea, but we didn't know anything. Otherwise, things would not have come to this. In the past year, you have seen how much we have lost. The Chui family today is completely incomparable to a year ago. Now, they want to build an academy and help the poor. Whether it is in the court or among the people, our influence cannot continue to be stable. Every year on Imperial Consort Chui's birthday, the officials and nobles in the court who had sided with the king of Shu would gather. It was a crucial day for the king of Shu's faction to plot together. Several people in the hall conversed softly. At a certain moment, someone suddenly raised his head and asked, "Now that Her Highness is in a difficult situation, I wonder what Assistant Minister Zeng thinks." The few of them turned their gazes over. Although the Zeng family had only risen in recent years and had a weak foundation, it could not be compared to families like the Chui family and the Chun family. However, Tseng Shichen was an extremely powerful person. After plotting together for so many years, they had long understood this. Tseng Shichen, who had been sitting there drinking tea since he stepped into the hall, raised his head and looked around blankly. He nodded and said, "The tea is good, not bad. Lord Chen, what do you think?" Chen Chong raised his teacup and took a sip. He said calmly, "Lord Zeng is right. This tea is not bad." Just as he finished speaking, there was a commotion outside. A servant of the Chui residence hurried in to report that Imperial Consort Chui had arrived. "Husband, can you really tell so much from single eyelids and double eyelids?" When Li was telling a bedtime story, as usual, He looked at Li Yi and asked in surprise when she heard him mention something. "Actually, there are many things in this world that follow a pattern." Li Yi smiled as he tucked her in. "It's not difficult to verify this. All you need to do is find parents with single eyelids and look at their children." Rui thought for a while and said in surprise, "That's true. In the past, in the Willow Leaf Village, there were a few couples with single eyelids. Their children really don't seem to have double eyelids." She looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "However, who would stare at other people's eyelids when they have nothing better to do? How boring is that? To discover these patterns, one must be very meticulous. But how did husband find out?" "That's not necessarily true." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Perhaps there really are people who are meticulous and bored." Chui residence. When the graceful and luxurious imperial consort Chui walked in from the front, the guests stood on both sides and nodded slightly. In the innermost part of the crowd, one person quietly raised his head. Chapter 811. The surname Chui was not an ordinary one in the Jing Kingdom. There were many families with the surname Chui in the Jing Kingdom, but the Chui family that people often mentioned only referred to the Chui family of Wuhan Province. As a prestigious clan that had been passed down for a few hundred years, it had experienced the change of dynasties, the change of ownership of the land, and how many imperial powers have been destroyed before rising again. But the Chui clan was still the Chui clan, and it stood towering on that piece of land without collapsing. It was truly even more stable than the imperial family. Of course, it wasn't because the Chui clan's military strength was strong, and it possessed an army of its own that caused the imperial family to be extremely fearful of it. It was instead because the Chui clan had been passed down for a few hundred years, and it was even to the extent that the Chui clan had an extremely high prestige in the hearts of the scholars in the Moon Prefecture, the neighboring prefectures, and even the entire world. It was easy to destroy the Chui family, but at the same time, it also destroyed the people's trust in the royal family. Therefore, even decades ago, when the Chui family was at its peak and could even control the court, the royal family did not take any extreme measures against the Chui family. Of course, since the emperor ascended the throne, he had deliberately supported the poor and adopted a strategy of slowly nibbling away at the power of the noble families in the court. In the past 20 years, the Chui family's influence in the court had been greatly weakened. Especially in this year, the Chui family's arrangements in the court for more than 10 years had almost suffered a destructive blow, and their reputation was no longer as strong as before. However, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The Chui family's disciples were all over the world, and they still had a reputation among the people. Moreover, they had a daughter who was the imperial concubine. Even if their influence was not as strong as before, they should not be underestimated. Moreover, the prince that imperial concubine Chui gave birth to was the current emperor's eldest son. According to the rules of etiquette, after the king of Shu ascended the throne, the Chui family's power would definitely reach a new peak. Every year, during imperial concubine Chui's birthday, she would appear for a short while at the Chui family's residence. This was also one of the few opportunities that some low-ranking officials had to see the beauty of the imperial concubine. Of course, when the imperial concubine walked over, most people would lower their heads to pay their respects, and they would even miss this opportunity. Therefore, no one noticed that in the crowd, The governor of the capital, Lu Daiyou, had lowered his head and looked at imperial concubine Shui, who was walking over slowly. Then he lowered his head again and moved his lips without making any sound. If someone knew how to read lips, they would naturally be able to read what he said. Damn it, it's too far. I can't see it clearly. It was the birthday of the noble consort. According to the rules of etiquette, there was a set of complicated procedures that had to be followed in the palace during the day. When noble consort Shui arrived at the Shui residence from a palace, it was already nighttime. Even though the Shui residence was brightly lit with lanterns and streamers, it was not difficult to see noble consort Shui's appearance from the back of the crowd at a distance of half a zhang. However, if one wanted to see more details, such as the color of noble consort Shui's lipstick, whether she had too much makeup on her face, whether she had a single eyelid, and so on, he couldn't see these clearly. Family concubine family, family family, family, family leaf family members. Although imperial concubine Shui was born in the Shui family, her identity had changed since she entered the palace. Her relationship with the Shui family had changed. Therefore, when she walked in slowly with the help of a palace maid, the head of the Shui family and the members of the Shui family were waiting respectfully in front of her. In the crowd, a minister of the Ministry of Rights lowered his head and waited for imperial concubine Shui to walk past him. He was still thinking, I don't know what imperial concubine Shui looks like. Last year, I didn't dare to raise my head. This year, I'm standing a little forward, but I still don't dare to raise my head. Just when he was hesitating whether he should glance at her or not, he suddenly felt a huge force behind him. He staggered and fell forward. Thump! The minister of the Board of Rights knelt on the ground. Before he could get up, he felt something pressing down on him from behind. Then there was a panicked voice. Who pushed me just now? Clang! Several guards rushed out from behind imperial concubine Shui. They unsheathed their weapons and pointed at the two people in front of them. Who are you? His eyes were blinded by the cold light on the tip of the saber. The minister of the Ministry of Rights had just stood up when he slumped back down. A middle-aged man got up from the ground and said in a panic, I don't know who pushed me from behind just now and disturbed your highness. Please forgive me. What's going on? Who are you? The head of the Shui family and the rest of the Shui family hurried over and asked with a gloomy face. The surrounding officials were also stunned because of this matter. Some people recognized the identity of the two men and immediately whispered to each other. Isn't that Minister Zhang of the Ministry of Rights? That seems to be Lord Liu, the capital magistrate. Why did the two of them run out? They said they were pushed by someone. Who would do such a senseless thing? Only then did the head of the Shui family, Shui Qingze, realize that it was a false alarm. He relaxed and was about to speak with a frown when imperial concubine Shui's voice came. Since there's nothing else, forget it. Go in first. Thank you, Your Highness. Your Highness is generous. County Magistrate Liu respectfully stood where he was and bowed to imperial concubine Shui. When he raised his head, his face was full of gratitude and respect. Then he returned to where he was and stood there respectfully. Imperial concubine Shui was indeed imperial concubine Shui. Her eyes were probably the most beautiful single eyelids he had ever seen. The head of the Shui family vaguely glared at County Magistrate Liu and the Minister of the Ministry of Rights. Then he turned his head and stretched out his hand, saying, Your Highness, please. Although today was Imperial Concubine Shui's birthday banquet, for most people, they could only glance at Imperial Concubine Shui when they lowered their heads. After Imperial Concubine Shui and the core members of the Shui family entered the main residence, the atmosphere outside began to warm up again. When fireworks began to bloom in the sky above the Shui residence, Yu Dingfeng, the patriarch of the Yu family, who was sitting at a table in a hall, smiled and said, If you want to talk about fireworks, you'll have to depend on Duke Chen's residence. Brother Shui, next year, you'll have to learn from Brother Chen. The head of the Shui family smiled but did not speak. Chen Chong led the guards of the Chun family to attack the Yu family's residence and even tore down the main gate of the Yu family's residence. Although the Yu family later paid a price to settle the matter, The enmity between the two families was considered to be formed. Everyone present was an old fox. Everyone knew that although Yu Dingfeng's words seemed to be praising, they were actually saying that the birthday banquet of the third miss of the Chun family was far grander than even imperial concubine Shui's birthday banquet. The Yu family had made a great contribution in the matter of the academy. It could be said that they single-handedly hindered the development of the academy, allowing the Chui family and many other aristocratic families to preserve their power. Although the Yu family was not as deep-rooted as the Chun family, with the Yu family's achievements, in the eyes of the Chui family and His Highness, the King of Shu, it was only a matter of time before the Yu family surpassed the Qin family. In fact, Chui Qing's attitude just now was already vaguely showing this trend. Beside the table, a trace of displeasure appeared on Chen Qing's face. However, Chen Cheng acted as if he did not hear or see it. He pointed to a dish in front of him, turned his head, and whispered to Tsang Shichen, who was sitting next to him, "This dish is not bad. Lord Tsang, please try it." After tasting it, Tsang Shichen nodded and said, "It is indeed good." "Lord Chen, why don't you try this?" This scene caused many people to be puzzled. This second master of the Chun family and this one from the Zheng family, other than occasionally discussing important matters together, had never had any contact. When did they become so close? At a table outside the hall, a few young people were toasting each other. Suddenly, one of them paused and suddenly said, "Look, who is that?" Everyone's eyes looked over. "Lu Daiyou, it's him. He actually came today." Many young masters in the capital, including young Duke Qin, had suffered a lot in the hands of this county magistrate Lu. Everyone naturally had a deep impression of him. Zhang Dijin looked over in confusion and murmured, "Doesn't this person always follow Li Yi's lead? Why is he here today? Could it be? Is he expressing goodwill to the Chui family? I'm afraid it's a little too late to express goodwill now." Seeing Lu Daiyou, someone felt a dull pain in his buttocks and said coldly, "Xixin, why don't you go over and check him out? If he really has the intention to express goodwill to the Chui family, you can let him off for what he has done in the past. If he harbors ill intentions and has ulterior motives, today." Chui Xixi nodded and stood up with a trace of a smile on his face. "This is the Chui family, a small capital magistrate, haha." At the banquet of the Chui family, close friends gathered at the table, drinking and chatting. Since they were on the side of the King of Shu and personally came to attend the birthday banquet of the imperial concubine, they naturally kept in touch with each other. It was rare to see someone like County Magistrate Lu drinking alone in silence. Of course, it was precisely because he occupied a table alone in the corner that no one was willing to sit with him. Naturally, no one could hear the words he whispered while drinking alone. Single eyelid, double eyelid. Damn it. What is this? Damn it, if I had known this, I wouldn't have come today. Mother of asterisk her. Who would believe such a thing? I can't say it now. The Chui family, Lord Lu. Chui Xixin came from behind with a wine glass in his hand and was about to speak with a smile. Damn it. County Magistrate Lu turned his head and said with a depressed face, extremely impatient, Chapter 812. The Chui family was a big family that had existed for hundreds of years, with numerous branches and numerous clansmen. Chui Xixin was a direct descendant of the Chui family. Although his status in the Chui family couldn't be compared with that of Chui Qingyu, he was also an outstanding disciple of the younger generation of the Chui family. In today's banquet, he could be regarded as half a host. Chui Xixin had no official position. Outside of the Chui family, others would give him a little face out of respect for the Chui family, but they might not regard him as a person of importance. However, within the Chui family, as the master, Chui Xixin's status and identity would increase imperceptibly in everyone's hearts. At this moment, he held a glass of wine and walked towards the direction of the magistrate of the capital city. Although he had suffered a loss in the hands of this person, he naturally dared not to make things difficult for him without the permission of the elders if he really abandoned the darkness for the light, and came to the Chui family to express his goodwill. Walking behind him, Chui Shixin heard that the magistrate seemed to be whispering something. He smiled and said, "Magistrate Liu, you mother of ****. At this moment, County Magistrate Liu was full of contradiction and annoyance. When he was cursing in a low voice to relieve the depression in his heart, he heard a voice behind him. Therefore, he turned around subconsciously and uttered the following words naturally. Chui Shixin held a glass of wine, and the smile on his face froze. After hearing what he just said, his eyes gradually became cold. "What did you just say?" County Magistrate Liu was stunned. Then he reached out and patted his shoulder, saying, "You mother of ****, the weather is so cold. Don't you know to wear more clothes? If you catch a cold, you will suffer. You young people don't know how to take care of your body at all." He held up a glass of wine and gently touched the glass in Chui Shixin's hand. After drinking up the wine in the glass, he waved his hand. "Child Chui, I have something else to do, so I'll leave first." After saying that, he stood up and strode towards the direction of the Chui mansion. "Stop!" Chui Shixin suddenly smashed the wine glass in his hand, turned around, and pointed at the leaving figure of County Magistrate Liu. When he walked over just now, not many people paid attention to him except those young figures. At this moment, he smashed the glass angrily in front of so many people, which made many people stunned on the spot. Today is the birthday of Imperial Concubine Chui. What's wrong with the third child of the Chui family? Isn't that person the magistrate of the capital city? How did he provoke the third child of the Chui family? How did he offend the third child of the Chui family come to the banquet today? Smashing the cup. Could it be that smashing the cup is the signal? Could it be that the Chui family wants to take advantage of noble consort Chui's birthday banquet to catch all those who don't listen to their orders? County Magistrate Liu stopped and turned his head and turned, asking, "Child Chui, child of Chui Chui." Chui Shixin glared at him. "How dare you insult my mother?" "Nonsense. Chui Liu of Chui Cun. Chui Shixin of Liu of Qf Chui Chui Chui, County of Liu of Qf Qf County of. Chui Shixin of County of Xian of Chui." County Magistrate Liu smiled and said, 2 days ago, the weather suddenly became cold. My son didn't put on clothes and caught a cold. He hasn't recovered yet and is recuperating at home. When I saw Child Chui Xiao of County, I thought of my son and couldn't help being a little anxious. Chui Shixin was a little embarrassed by his words and said angrily, "Your son is your son. I am me." County Magistrate Liu hurriedly waved his hand and explained, "Child Chui, you are right. I don't have a son like you." "You." Chui Shixin's face was full of anger again. At this time, a figure came hurriedly behind him. "What's wrong? What happened?" A middle-aged man walked out of the hall and looked at Chui Shixin. Chui Shixin pointed at County Magistrate Liu. After moving his lips, he lowered his head and said, "Fourth uncle, it's nothing. Lord Liu wants to leave, and I will see him off." He was very clear that the most important thing today was the birthday banquet of the imperial concubine. Not to mention him, even his father would not be able to get away if something happened at the birthday banquet. He was irritated by the rude words of Liu just now. Now that he calmed down, he immediately broke into a cold sweat. "Child Chui, don't be so polite. I know the way." County Magistrate Liu looked at him with a smile and turned away decisively. The servants of the Chui family cleaned up the broken pieces. When Chui Shixin walked back to the table, several people immediately surrounded him. "What happened there just now? What does that Liu want to do?" Chui Shixin's face was extremely gloomy. He told them what happened just now in detail. One of them was shocked and said, "In the Chui family, Liu Daio dared not to give you face. Why did he come here today?" Song Zijian was astonished. "What's going on? Could it be that Liu Daio came here today just to cause trouble? Who gave him the guts to do so?" Li Yi, it must be Marquis Li Yi of Chang'an County. In another place, an official lowered his voice and said, "Everyone in the capital city knows that the capital magistrate Liu Daio works for Marquis Li Yi of Chang'an County. Marquis Li Yi is not on good terms with the Chui family. There is no reason for him to come here today. It turns out that he just came for, yes, when the imperial concubine came here, it seemed that he directly rushed out to block the way. The conversation between him and the third young master of the Chui family was obviously a public joke. The third young master of the Chui family is still too young to take advantage of this old fox verbally. However, this Lu Dayo is really bold. He even dared to make trouble at the birthday banquet of the imperial concubine. Marquis Li Yi is too strong. The Chui family can't do anything to him, but he is just a small capital magistrate. He's going too far. He's going too far. A man of the Chui family slapped the table and said angrily, "He really thinks that the Chui family can come and go as he pleases. Why didn't we stop him just now?" The fourth uncle of the Chui family glanced at him and said, "He is after all a fifth-grade capital magistrate and works for the princess. You know who is in charge in the court now. Besides, what reason can he use to detain an official of the court? Do you think the Chui family is still the same Chui family as before?" The man said with a sullen face, "Are we going to let so many people see our Chui family as a joke? Fortunately, it's just a small conflict between Shi Xin and him. The impact hasn't spread." The fourth uncle of the Chui family knocked on the table with his index finger and said, "The matter of the academy has come to an end. If there is no accident, it won't be long before the eldest princess's academy can't be run anymore. With such a big oversight, we don't need to do anything. At that time, the officials won't allow her to continue to manage the government. At that time, we can slowly deal with the capital magistrate. However, County Marquis Li and Dr. Li have really gone too far by making trouble in our Chui mansion during the concubine's birthday." Outside the Chui mansion, Detective Zhao saw his master coming out from inside and said in surprise, "Master, is it over? Why are you back so soon? Have you eaten your capital back?" He was extremely curious at the moment. What did his master eat inside? How could he eat such a generous gift in such a short time? County Magistrate Lu shook his head and said, "Not much. I came back after drinking a few cups of wine." Detective Zhao thought for a while and asked then, "Did you see the imperial concubine?" "Yes." County Magistrate Lu nodded. Detective Zhao looked curious and asked, "What does the imperial concubine look like? How is she different from ordinary women?" "Shut up." County Magistrate Lu glanced at him and said lightly, "A loose tongue can cause trouble. You can't talk about the affairs of the royal family at will. Do you want her head or not?" Detective Zhao was stunned for a moment and then came to his senses. He slapped himself and said repeatedly, "Master, please forgive me. I deserve to be slapped for my foul mouth. I deserve to be slapped. You'd better remember this." County Magistrate Lu looked at him and said in a low voice, "In the future, don't ask what you shouldn't ask and don't say what you shouldn't say." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.